Well, hey everyone, this is Pat Mercedes, and in case you haven't heard, we are having an election. And it's been an amazing, terrible, horrifying, awful few years. Tonight I'm going to be interviewing some of the, freedom parties and some of the heroes. But we're going to ask some of the hard questions. I'm going to be speaking to people from One Nation, going to be speaking to Craig Kelly from UAP, going to be speaking to one of our VIP special guests later. I'll let you know who that is. Also going to be speaking to Campbell Newman. We're going to be asking questions that you want answers for. It's all good and well that our left and right side, as well as the red shirt Greens, get up there and start throwing money. But there's real questions, real painful questions that they are refusing to answer. Tonight, in a few minutes, I'm going to introduce my co-host, James McPherson from Spectator magazine, someone who's not been afraid to stand. And we're going to ask questions that pertain to faith and pertain to freedom, because the two go hand in hand. But you know, the last 2 years, our nation has suffered. We've suffered emotionally. We've suffered due to some of the longest, harshest lockdowns during this pandemic. We've suffered spiritually, having our houses of worship shut down. We've suffered emotionally, being alienated from our families and friends and loved ones. We've suffered economically, especially those that were once the health workers that were the heroes and now have become the unemployed. You see, those that were meant to protect us basically threw us under a bus. And then they threw their arms up in the air saying, hey, what could we do? They were meant to protect us. Instead, they fed us to the lions of the likes of WHO and the World Economic Forum. They threw us into the lion's den of woketopia, many of them saying this is not their job. Now they come to us with bread and, of course, their circus, wanting us to reinstate them so they can save their jobs. We were alienated from loved ones, parents, from seeing and saluting those that we love through our funerals. Sick fathers, sick mothers, sick children, even babies were not off limits to the tyrants. Pregnant women were violently treated, arresting grandmothers, throwing them to the floor and pepper spraying them, while tanks rolled down the beautiful streets of what was once our great Southland. But yet, our leader, who was supposed to be the father of our nation, said not a word. He blamed the premiers. As the tanks rolled down, marching down the street, we began to see, is this the nation that we really have worked so hard to build? Our ethnic communities in the southwest of Sydney, with some that had elderly grandmas and grandpas who could barely speak English, were terrified as their memories were relived of some of the places that they had escaped from, with drones at night and the knock on the door, checking to see if you were abiding by the rule of the tyrants. You see, our government overreach, the brutality of the police, the lies of the politicians, all under the guise of we're all in this together. But we weren't. All under the guise of public health. We were distanced from our churches as woke, cowardice church leaders complied. They said to us, follow the science. But many of us understood if we just followed the 30 pieces of silver, which is always the backbone of betrayal, lie, and deception, we would somewhat come to the truth. Yet those of us that dared to raise our voices, we were called conspiracy theorists 1 minute, only to realize that our prophecies were being fulfilled right before our very eyes. Our churches joined in with the hypocrisy, shutting down the house of God, alienating people, those particularly of my religious persuasion, the Pentecostal, who believed in divine healing, were some of the first to shut their doors, and instead of the laying on of hands, pointing the finger to the exit door. The Salvation Army, who was birthed by the great General William Booth, would have turned in his grave if he would see what the Salvation Army was doing, is doing, and is continuing to do. The limit of accessibility, locking out grandmothers. But yet, in the last 2 years, even these places of worship have suffered a heavy price. Their pews are empty. Some of their leadership has been, well, let's just say they're not around. Others of them conveniently went missing in action and moved into retirement. While many of us were wondering where were our Christian leaders? Where were they? Where were the generals of the faith? And I don't say that in the means of condemning. I'm saying that in the means to rally us, because we are the army of the living God. Those that shut down our businesses, kept us from our loved ones, caused us to lose our jobs, now want us to blindly forget, and hopefully they want some of us to give them our vote so they don't lose their jobs. But during this time, there were some unlikely heroes. A pilot from Qantas called Hoodie, a wedding photographer, Ruksha, a filmmaker, Topher Field, a young lady who dared to resist and was basically our first political prisoner, a former Jewish soldier, and a pastor who refused to shut his door, Pastor Paul, all became voices and heroes for the least of these. Today, we face an election. Silence from some quarters is loud, and still they continue with the bread and circus. You see, the betrayal of both Labor, Liberal and the Greens has caused us to rethink our political and our social structure. And I want to say this is not politics. This is biblical. The Bible says that righteousness exalts a nation. And I'm certainly not here to point a finger at anyone or to be anyone's moral compass. And I know that many people out there would agree, those that complied and those that did not comply, but could see the wrong in us not being able to do things with our conscience, in those that question our volition or the freedom of what went into our bodies. Some of them felt incredible compassion and joined the marches on the street. You see, freedom is a complex thing. Every time there is the cause of freedom, there are always tyrants that rise up. And let me say this. There has never been a time where there is a right way to do a wrong thing. And when silence is forced, or silence is the order of the day, when all of a sudden voices rise up called fact checkers, who simply check the facts if they are according to their beliefs, then other voices rise up. And tonight, there is still a fight. The tyranny is not over. See, the problem with tyrannical leadership is that it always thinks it's doing it for the good of the people. But let me say this. Those in history that have coerced, bullied, vilified, demonized, they've never been the good guys, folks. And if you think it's all over, we have another struggle coming up. The struggle of what's about to happen if our nation goes to the hand of these unconscionable, those without, I dare say, a soul, leftists, who are only tolerant when you agree with them. Then they become the most vicious, the most intolerant, and the most vindictive, calling people like me and my friends James McPherson and some of you out there a death cult, which we are not. We are about life. Jesus said, I came that you might have life and life more abundantly. And now, some nations are on the verge of the pandemic treaty. Yet we've not heard a thing from Labor, Greens, or the Liberal Party in that. Well, tonight we're going to ask the hard questions. And let me introduce to you my very special friend and a great man, a great writer, James McPherson. James, thanks for being on tonight.
Hey, Pat, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to talking to our guests tonight, 1 week out from the election. So it's a great chance for people to hear firsthand from some of the leaders and key players in some of the minor parties. So thanks for organising this tonight. It's a great initiative.
Well, James, I reached out to the Prime Minister 2 or 3 occasions. I'm still waiting for him to... I know he got our message. I know he got the message because I know the senators that wrote to him. And we also reached out to the likes of Amanda Stoker, who was very busy. But thankfully tonight we've got people like Senator Alexander. We've got George Christensen. We've got Malcolm Roberts, always a favourite. We've got Topher Field on. We've got Craig Kelly on. And later on in the show, I'm bringing out Lowell Shelton. We're bringing the bin guns out tonight. So, James, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's get this underway, Pat.
Well, two of the great freedom fighters and two of the men that have really stood for us during this time is Senator Malcolm Roberts and our great friend George Christensen. How are you, gentlemen?
I'm very well, thank you,
good,
Pat. Hi, James.
Hey,
James.
good to
G'day,
see you guys.
George.
Hey, George, how are you?
I'm good. I'm even better to be seeing two of my favourite pastors and one of my favourite senators.
Gee, don't call me a pastor, mate. That'll really, you're starting to scare me, mate. But gentlemen, Pauline's not well, and we send our prayers to Pauline, who, by the way, congratulations to Pauline, voted Mother of the Year. If there is a Mother of a Nation, it's definitely Pauline. And we just want to ask questions. By the way, we've not sent any one of these people our questions beforehand, unlike what they do in mainstream media. I want to ask you both, and then James, if you could jump in. Why one nation? Why should the people of Australia vote for one nation? Senator Malcolm, over to you first.
Because we've got the proven leader in Pauline Hanson. She's number one on the Senate ticket. She's a wonderful leader. People trust her. We got a message today from someone who said that they voted Greens all their life. They're voting One Nation this election because the Greens want mandates. They want to control. One Nation doesn't control. We protect freedom and we restore freedom. That's fundamentally it. And number one, when we assess an issue, Pat, is what is in the national interest. We look after people's individual freedoms and the national interest. That's why, and we've now got a very consistent record in the Parliament. We've also got a consistent record in Queensland State Parliament and under the wonderful Mark Latham in New South Wales Parliament and Steve Andrew in Queensland. So we're very consistent now. We're very stable. We focus on the core issues and we tell the bloody truth.
Do you know, I want to jump in here and say this right off the cuff. One Nation stood by the Christian community more than anyone else that I know. When Scott Morrison went and did his deal with Labor and threw the Christian schools under a bus, One Nation stood against that. So thank you. George, why One Nation?
Well, Malcolm's obviously very succinctly summed it up, but if I can say the question that leads into why One Nation is, why not the major parties? And I've come out of one of the major parties, obviously the Liberal National Party. I couldn't belong to it anymore because what I've seen over the last few years is destruction of freedoms on numerous levels. Obviously, freedom of choice, freedom of movement, freedom even of speech and association that we saw destroyed under the pandemic measures. And that was supported by the federal government. Let no one tell you otherwise. That was supported by the federal Liberal National Government. They made the Australian Immunisation register mandatory to report to, and that paved the way for vaccine discrimination and vaccine mandates. We've seen, freedom of faith, which they promised us they would do something about, and they didn't do something about it, and they tried to make it worse, as you've just alluded to, Pat. And it's the Liberal National Party that have pushed together the digital identity agenda. There's legislation that's drafted already for that, and I'm sure Labor's going to do exactly the same thing, or they'll probably make it even worse. So that's why you can't trust the majors. And I'm with Malcolm, obviously, 100%. Pauline Hanson's One Nation is basically the sentry at the gate, trying to stop all of this evil, all of these bad laws from affecting you, your families, and our nation. And that's why I think that Pauline Hanson's One Nation should be the number one option. They are proven sentries at the gate. Just look at what Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts have been doing over the last few years for us all.
Pat, can I add something, Pat?
Yes, absolutely, Malcolm.
You mentioned the pandemic treaty, the UN's World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. We've been asked questions about this, and we've said until last Thursday, look, it's just a review of the pandemic, of the World Health Organization's operations, and it won't be done and decided until 2024. Last Thursday, we became aware of something far more sinister, and that was a vote sometime between the 22nd of May, which is the day after our election, and the 28th of May. That is a completely separate issue. That will be revising the world, what do they call themselves? International health orders, international health regulations. This has been sprung on the delegation that's meeting, I think, in Geneva from the 22nd to 28th of May. It will give the World Health Organization unprecedented powers to declare a potential pandemic based on what is potentially a pandemic. It will give the World Health Organization the powers to declare a pandemic based on some potential. It will also take over the management of pandemics and health in any country that signs that. We will also, under that, have forced quarantine. We will have people being carted away. We will have people being forced to be injected if the United Nations unelected, unaccountable internationalist bureaucrats dictate that. Now, this is coming up for a vote. Now, that just changes the regulations. On 28th of May. If the Australian Parliament then backs it up in Parliament. Now, the Liberal, Nationals and Labor have a sad and sorry history of ceding our country's sovereignty. One Nation is the only party that will oppose that legislation when it comes before the Parliament. This is really scary stuff. It makes COVID look like child's play. This is an international edict if it's passed.
Yeah.
Only one nation will oppose that.
Can I ask you a question about that, Malcolm? Because Craig Kelly raised this today at the press club, and the Australian, in reporting his comments, described his comments as bizarre. So I don't doubt what you're saying, but why do even the media play this up as a big conspiracy theory and not take it seriously?
Where do they get their money from? The globalist predators. That's who they get their money from. The globalist predators. This will give, with forced injections globally, it will give the globalist predators through Big Pharma the opportunity to make squillions of dollars. That's what they want. It'll also give them control. And it's yet another form of deceit, James. I hope that answers your question.
The other question I want to ask you from the press club was Adam Bant, who's the leader of the Greens. He outlined to the press club his demands if he were to have balance of power. If One Nation was to have balance of power in the Parliament, what would be the number one demand you would have as a condition for aligning yourself with presumably a Liberal government? But what would be your number one demand?
Well, number one is I wouldn't make demands number one. Number one would be an understanding that we will work in the national interest. That's what drives One Nation. There's no fancy philosophy from Pauline Hanson. It is we do whatever is in the national interest. That's number one. That'll even guide us to whether we consider that. But number one demand, if we decide to go down that road, is very simple, as George just said. End the mandates, restore freedoms, restore basic human rights. That's not negotiable.
Quick question. There's a lot of talk right now about what people, the economy. And it looks like Labor and Liberal. I mean, honestly, it looks like, one's raising, they got a 5 and I'll raise you a 2. And they're playing these games with us. Economically, how can One Nation, and that this answer either George or Malcolm, how will we be better off with One Nation? I know, for example, you're not going to tolerate nonsense, this climate change nonsense. It's going to lose thousands of jobs. How would that help us economically? I'm not after policy. I'm just more vision as to where you guys see the country.
Where you go,
Well, do you
George?
mind have a crack? Thanks, Malcolm. Well, look, I think that, again, the whole sentry at the gate analogy proves very well in economic matters as well, because every time, some stupid bit of spending, and look, you only have to go and have a look at some of the arts grants that go about. If we see that, we pull it up. We pull it up in budget estimates. We'll pull it up on the floor of Parliament and try and get it removed, or at least expose it for the waste that it is. So this is how we improve the budget. It is like an elephant, because at the moment it's a nearly $1 trillion sized elephant. And the only way that you can eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And That's what One Nation will be doing, just going in there and pointing out whether it's, the largesse that goes to the ABC that shouldn't go to the ABC,
Oh, Lord.
whether it's, arts grants for people that just basically want to show their genitalia on stage, Pat, whether it's the myriad, the millions and millions of dollars that's spent on this climate change hoax. These are the things that One Nation wants to pull up and will pull up if we have the balance of power.
The other thing that I would add to you, Pat, or James, if I can.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. We'll get back to basics. Our country's productive capacity and economic security have been smashed, and that undermines our military security. We can't go anywhere without cheap energy. We export the fuels for cheap energy, and we don't have cheap energy because we're too busy subsidizing the bloody Chinese for coming in here and giving us their solar panels and their wind turbines that they made with our resources. We're subsidizing these people to do that. And that's not a criticism of the Chinese. They're smart business people, very smart. And we would restore energy. We've talked about that. We've put proposals forward consistently for the last 6 years. We would restore the taxation of multinational companies, which was foreign-owned multinational companies, which has been destroyed since 1953 under the Liberal Prime Minister Robert Menzies. We would restore economic security. We would restore productive capacity, start building the power stations, the water infrastructure, restore economic management. George has already touched on that. The debt. No one's talking about the debt amongst the major parties. They both put us there. We would be looking at spending, like, as George said, the ABC, the NDIS, looking at education, the destruction of our school curriculum, the destruction of our children, the destruction of our families. We would also be looking at the destruction of people's health. The state government in Queensland, just like everywhere else, has been funded by the federal government to put down lockdowns, and now they're being funded by the federal government to destroy the health system. We've got accident ramping, which George knows even better than I do. And we've got ambulance ramping. We've also got 7,000 nurses stood down. We've got 20,000 teachers set aside. We've got kids literally losing limbs and fingers in classrooms. This is just abominable. And One Nation has the courage to discuss these things. No one else does. They're all quiet. But we have the courage to discuss these and the courage to address them.
James, last question to these two outstanding gentlemen.
Just quickly, it's been a bit of a funny election campaign. Anthony Albanese has promised to be caring. Scott Morrison has promised to be different. And there's really been no discussion of policy at all up until the last couple of days when housing affordability has been a big issue. You've got the Labor Party promising to own 40% of your home. You've got the Liberal Party promising to unlock, I think it's $50,000 of your superannuation. Where does One Nation stand on those policies, or do you have something better in terms of home affordability?
Yes, we do. We do have something better, and that is get rid of all foreign investment and foreign ownership of Australian property, whether it be residential, agricultural, whatever. That is one of the key factors that's driving up housing prices in this country, is the amount of foreign capital that's going in to investment. It's not negative gearing per se. It is this huge influx of foreign money. Malcolm even might have the specific details on the amount that's gone in, but it's been horrendous. And look, I'm personally a bit sympathetic to accessing the superannuation. I'm not sure what the party's policy is on that, but the idea that the government will come in and own 40% of my home, well, that's straight from the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum playbook. Now the government's going to own 40% of what I have, and I'll be happy about it. And eventually it's
40% of nothing, George, is still nothing. 40% of nothing, right. George, is still nothing.
But can I just say something about this? Look, I deal with people and their financials things every day of my life. What is Morrison thinking? Seriously. Firstly, first home owners have got to access 50% of their super. Does he not realise that most first home owners wouldn't have 50,000 in their super?
Yeah.
I mean, and they're only allowed to access 20 or 30% or whatever it was. I hope all my Christian friends don't get mad at me. It's a crock.
Well, look, Pat, when you have Albo's best asset is ScoMo, and ScoMo's best asset is Albo, we're in deep trouble.
Well, they're backing each other. They've given each other, and this is what people need to be aware. People are constantly asking about preferences. Listen, here's the scary part. Labor has backed Liberal, and Liberal has backed Labor. These are like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito, the twins. They got nothing in common, but everything in common, which is, well, I'll leave that alone because I don't want to get shut down by the fact checkers. But anyway,
these are actually worse. These are actually worse, Pat. These are Siamese twin. They're joined at the hip, right through to the spine. If they've either of them got spine. But coming back to George's question on immigration, George's question on housing, the reason housing prices are so high is fundamentally two things: the huge immigration that went on until the virus. It's not a pandemic until the virus arrived. And now we've got Labor and Liberal endorsing in Liberal's budget a return to the explosive immigration of 240,000 a year. That's number one, it puts demand. Number two is we've got so much red tape, green tape, and blue UN tape that's driving up the cost of land for houses. That's what drives it up. The cost of a house to be constructed in Houston, Texas, is roughly the same as in Australia. But the differences are the level of tax. In Australia, when you look at the taxes overall, it's about 50% of the price of a house is tax. And then the cost of the land is huge compared to Houston. That's been constrained by government regulation, blue UN tape, green environmental tape. That's what's doing it. And we've got to start waking up because, you know, what happened, Pat, you just mentioned I mentioned the Siamese twins. But on the day the election was announced, the election date was announced, all we've heard from the media is Albo versus ScoMo, Albo versus ScoMo, Albo versus ScoMo. There's no other alternative. The other alternatives are rising, and they're very, very strong in people's mind. What we've got to do is get rid of the duopoly, because the duopoly is really a uni-party, because as George hit the nail on the head, he's so incisive, the World Economic Forum and the UN control both these parties. They're traitorous. And we're looking now not only at the World Health orders and World Health regulations being changed within a week, we're looking at trade sanctions being set behind any country that does not pass them through regulation and through legislation.
Well, Senator Malcolm Roberts, it's always great talking to you. You're a wealth of wisdom. And George, you're always you're a great man. And James, last question you want to ask these gentlemen? We've got you here. We might as well work you, James.
Well, look, let me ask you a question, George, because you were part of the coalition. You left the coalition. You've joined One Nation. Help me as someone who would probably normally vote Liberal, but I'm not happy with the Liberals. But I'm scared to not vote for them because I don't want Labor to get in. So help me work out how I protest against the Liberals without ending up with a Labor government.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, look, firstly, it actually allows me to say something which I've thought would be a good thing to say, and that is about preferences. One Nation has been accused of preferencing Labor, has been accused of preferencing the Liberals, has been even accused locally of preferencing the Greens. Can I tell you that our how to vote cards, which is not your preference is your vote, a how to vote card that we issue as a recommendation, the only person who can direct preferences is you, the voter. A party can only recommend. So we recommend that the freedom parties, just about in every electorate, in fact, I think I would say every electorate across the nation, the freedom parties go first under, of course, Pauline Hanson's One Nation, and that in most electorates, that at the end of the ticket, it would be the Greens, then Labor second last, and then Liberals third last. There are some seats where we think that the Liberal sitting MP is just so left-wing they may as well be in the Greens, and so we're putting them below Labor. But we are preferencing the freedom parties, James, because we want neither of those parties in power, quite frankly. But the reality is that they very well, one of the two majors probably will be. And I guess that One Nation would probably work better with a Liberal national government, trying as desperately as we can to pull it towards traditional conservative values, which includes freedom. But we will try and do that with whoever is in government. But mate, what I would say to you is that your vote is your choice. So if you want to vote for One Nation, vote for One Nation. If you want to put the Liberals above Labor on your ballot paper, do that. If you want to put Labor above the Liberals on your ballot paper, do that. Your vote is your choice.
George, you're going to tell them about a hung parliament and why the Liberals are trying to scare people out of a hung parliament, and why that's a benefit to us, and what kind of hung parliament we really want?
Yes, well, I'll let you do that, Malcolm.
I'll let you do it. You do it, Malcolm.
We need a hung parliament. Now, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party say, oh, it'll be a frightening mess. There'll be confusion everywhere. We won't be able to govern. Rubbish. Because with a hung parliament, it means there'll be honest debate, and people will put the bills under scrutiny. We don't just want a hung parliament, Pat and James. Yeah. We want a well-hung parliament so that there's a lot of debate. A well-hung parliament is what this country needs.
Absolutely.
That's why I let him do it. That's why I let him do it.
That's why you let him do it. Hey, look, thank you, gentlemen.
You've rehearsed that line, Malcolm.
I have. I used it in church last week.
Yeah, we'll leave that alone. Now, Senator Malcolm, thank you. George, thank you. Love to Pauline, and we want her to get well real soon. You know, and get out there, guys, get behind them. These freedom parties, listen, people are asking me, what about this freedom party? What about that freedom? What about that freedom party? If they're not on the program, take a hint, folks. Except let me just mention Monica Smith standing out there, amazing lady. You know, really, we've got to get behind Monica, all of you in Victoria down there, and later on we're going to have Topher Field. Anyway, one of the real heroes, James, I think I'll let you introduce our next guest because you were a former Queenslander.
I am a former Queenslander, and I've got to say, Campbell Newman, our next guest, did a great job, first as the Mayor of Brisbane and then as the Premier of Queensland. And I guess the last thing he needs personally is to be back in politics, and that's what I actually want to ask him when he comes on, is why he's decided to re-enter the fray at this time. So I think Campbell Newman is
let's bring him on. There he is.
Now.
How are you, Campbell?
G'day, James, and g'day, Pat. Thanks for having me.
You're looking well.
Sorry?
I said you're looking well.
So are you guys, and you look very fired up this evening after just watching what's just been on.
James, over to you.
Campbell, I do want to ask you before we get into policies and the politics of it, on a personal level, why have you re-engaged in politics? I mean, you've been successful at local level, state level. I imagine you don't really need the trouble of a federal election. Why have you decided to re-enter the fray?
Okay, so since I was voted out of office back in January 2015, for the last 7 years, I've been a private businessman. So I'm not on any government boards. I don't get a pension. Yeah, I'm not on the payroll at all. I've had to earn my own living, as I've done prior to politics. And I've really enjoyed building a business career. So I'm involved in a range of technology companies, and I also invest in commercial property. And it's been great. And I have great business partners, and I love what I do. But you know what? I guess the first thing is I watched with dismay over the last 7 years as a coalition government, supposedly for small business and small government, got progressively out of control. They whacked small business with more and more red tape and bureaucracy. You know, for example, those who are watching this evening who are running small businesses, did you vote last time for the requirement to have a director's ID number, for example? Those who are watching will know what I mean. But then COVID particularly was the catalyst, where I saw a Prime Minister that I once really supported, I really respected, completely overreact on a range of issues. We've spent far too much money. The inflation we're seeing now is because of wasteful government expenditure. I was warning on, for example, Sky News Australia from mid last year about the potential for inflation. Now it's happening and they're all pretending they couldn't see it coming. But then the COVID restrictions particularly upset me. And, you know, we saw terrible scenes in Victoria with protesters being fired upon by the police and pregnant women being dragged out of their homes. We saw just the curtailment of our freedoms and liberties. And the final straw for me particularly was a Prime Minister who said that he didn't want vaccination to be mandatory, to turn around then and actually wave through state premiers, excluding people from society and denying them the ability to work. And I'm talking about, of course, the vaccine mandates, and that was it. I'd had enough. And I left the Liberal Party, joined the Lib Dems, and I've been campaigning for them ever since as the lead Senate candidate here in Queensland. So that's the story.
Campbell, you won government at a state level in Queensland in a landslide, and then lost government in a landslide, lasting only one term. What did you learn from that experience that will make you different in your approach to politics this time if you're elected?
I guess pick your fights, not have as many. But I just say to you that we lost narrowly in 2015. I'm not trying to reinvent history, but the facts are these, that we actually lost with a primary vote of 41.3%, which was basically what Morrison got when he won in 2019, just the way the preferences worked here. And we were a government of reform. We turned around the hospitals. We had the best performing surgery waiting times in the nation. We'd ended ambulance ramping. Crime was down 15% across a whole range of very important categories, violence against people and burglaries and the like. We'd created a long-term plan for Queensland, the Queensland Plan. We gave an apology to the victims of forced adoptions. We'd got the Queen's Wharf project going, which Labor Party love to claim as their own these days. And I could go on, but we particularly, though, had sorted out the state's finances, balancing the budget and putting us back on a path to, getting the debt down. And that matters because the higher the government spends, the more the people pay, and that, through higher taxes. So, I guess I'm proud of our achievements. We went hard, and that's probably the thing I would say to people. Maybe we shouldn't have gone as hard. But it's a bit different going for the Senate, because what I'm trying to do now, and I'm very much thinking about what both your previous speakers, Malcolm and George, were talking about, it's important to actually hold government to account. So as a senator, I want to take the things I know about government and about how bureaucracy works and how public servants try and play their own agendas and hold people in Canberra to account. Not just the politicians, not just, say, an Albanese government, which we might be about to get, but the bureaucrats themselves.
I just want to ask you a question, Campbell. How much power do these lobbyists have over our politicians, and how can we ensure that they don't have that much power over political leaders?
Well, I think the ones that we're seeing these days that have very strong links internally to the political parties, I think that's one of the most diabolical aspects of what we're seeing today. So, for example, there's been well-reported cases here in Queensland where people who are operatives in the Labor Party are getting incredible access to Labor ministers and the Premier herself. And I think that's very worrying. And I dare say it's probably happening with this federal government as well. What we need to do to combat that is to actually have greater openness in government. So again, what George and Malcolm were talking about, if I become a senator for Queensland, when we have these Senate estimates hearings, I will be relentless. I'll be like a terrier in going after what's really going on. I will be getting to the bottom of the money that's being spent, the decisions that are made. For example, why do we allow public servants to get out there and start negotiating treaties and agreements internationally before Australians know what's really going on? So a lot of the things that Australia signed up to in the last sort of 40 to 50 years have actually then eroded our sovereignty. And we're told, there's an international treaty, therefore we now have to sort of accede to that. So those sorts of things have to be scrutinised. And I dare say, my pitch to viewers this evening is that you need people who understand how the process works. You need people who can go in and ask the right questions and expose these things. So that's the best defence, whether it be internal domestic stuff and who's getting the money, whether it's external stuff in the way I've just described.
James?
Campbell, let me just put a couple of propositions to you. Climate change is not an existential threat. Agree or disagree?
Look, I think climate change is turning out to be the biggest scare campaign of my lifetime. I think these days it's rubbish. And I say that because as a person who 15 years ago, and I'm saying this all the time, this is not something I'm saying the first time this evening, 15 years ago, I had drunk the Kool-Aid. As Lord Mayor of Brisbane, I was quite proud of our track record in sustainability, reducing emissions, etc. But since that time, I've been watching very closely at all the predictions about sea level rise and no snow in the Australian Alps, and that 50,000 kilometres of the Australian coastline would be disappearing, that there wouldn't rain and the dams wouldn't fill. It just goes on and on and on. I don't believe it anymore. And even if it is happening, I say this, it would be it is, because I'm afraid it's happening. It is totally reckless for us to dismantle Australia's economy and our competitive advantage on the world stage with our plentiful fossil fuels that we export, clean fossil fuels in a relative sense that we export to countries, particularly developing countries. That's madness. It will kill jobs in Queensland. It will kill jobs in places like the Hunter Valley of New South Wales. It cannot be just allowed to be waved through. So that's what I'm standing for. And I'll give you one final point on why I don't believe in it. We had the Prime Minister stand up a few weeks ago, I think it was at Lismore, and he said, Australia's getting harder to live in. We're getting all these extra floods. And it was on the back of what had happened in Brisbane. So I went and checked. The first 100 years of white history or white settlement in Brisbane, there were 9 floods as big as 2022 or larger. In the second 100 years of Brisbane's history, so from the 1920s to the 2020s, there's been 3. Now, Brisbane isn't seeing more floods. In fact, it's been a drier 100 years, if I can put it like that. So when I hear unprecedented floods and unprecedented bushfires, I say rubbish, because when I go and check the record, it isn't actually the case.
Now, James, I just want to jump in here and say something to Campbell right now. Campbell, you have now become my 3rd best friend in the whole world with that statement that you just made then. And James was 3, but he's gone now. You've taken the place. Thanks for that statement on closure. Anyway, back to you, James. It's a great question.
I'm not sure I want to talk to Campbell anymore now. He's stealing all my friends. Let me give you another proposition. Let me give you another proposition, Campbell. Gender is a fixed biological reality. Agree or disagree?
Let me say it. This is a bit more complicated, but I'm not equivocating. I hasten to say it. Look, I have no problem as a Lib Dem, because we're libertarians, if somebody feels desperately that they should be a different gender and they want to, take the steps to actually change their sex. And I'm sympathetic, and I know people who've chosen to do that. But what I say to you is this shouldn't be dominating our airspace. Children shouldn't be being taught about this in schools. You should have to be 18 before you can actually go and have the reassignment surgery and the treatment with drugs, etc. I don't believe that transgender men transgender women, I suppose is the right term, that people who've been men who become women, I don't believe they should be playing women's sport. So I answered the question in that way. Again, I respect that they might want to do that, but there are some serious issues that should be around that in terms of what we say as a society. And I hope that that's helpful. Yeah.
Do you know, Campbell, here's where I stand on it. And I'm pretty, James knows I'm so far right, you can't get any further. And God gives everybody a free will. It's like, with the jab. You want to get jabbed, knock yourself out. You don't want? That's fine. I have my views, etc. And people have a free will. Now, what people do with that will is their choice. It's when people try and impose that will on me, then I've got a problem with it. And so to me, you know, my job is to kind of point people up and to be somewhat to give people direction. But and again, I don't want to get hammered on that. People can do what they want, but when they start legislating it like the Greens want to do, that bothers me. James, can I ask Campbell a question?
This pronoun, and can I just throw in this pronoun thing drives me around the bend. It's just like, I'm sorry, I can't keep up with it, and I really don't care, and I'm not going to play their game because it's their game.
Yep. James?
Let me put another one to you, Campbell. Religious freedom is as important and as first order issue as freedom of speech. The two are essential to a functioning society. Agree or disagree?
I absolutely agree. That's really straightforward. And by the way, on the free speech issue and the religious freedom issue, I mean, you know, the Lib Dems do have a really comprehensive policy platform for this election. It's called the Freedom Manifesto. It's ldp.org.au/freedom. We are the only party, I believe, with the greatest respect to the two gentlemen on before, we have a comprehensive policy platform. I think they've got some very specific issues that they are great, and I agree with them on almost all of it. But we've got a very broad platform across a range of things, and one of them is freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and we believe there should be a constitutional amendment to the Australian Constitution, shamelessly taken from the words in the US Constitution. It's worked well for them. We reckon we get that in our Australian Constitution, and we'll be a much better country for it.
Campbell, I just want to ask you, I know I'm going to get bombarded with people asking me, where can we get this Freedom Manifesto? Where can we get it? Campbell, how can we get it? Where can people access it? Could you help us? And maybe my team there might be able to get a link or something and post it up.
Yeah, it's our website, ldp.org.au/freedom. And, you know, it covers COVID, freedom from COVID mania, voluntary superannuation, lower taxes, budget responsibility. You know, we're, for example, the only party talking about the need to curtail wasteful spending to deal with inflation. There's freedom from surveillance. We're talking about the education system. You know, we agree with the gentlemen who were on before about the need to stop this woke nonsense in our schools.
Campbell, I'll get you to say that one more time because you said it so fast. But could I get just one more time where we could get that? One more time.
ldp.org.au/freedom.
Thank you. I just want to say to everyone out there, Campbell Newman is a great bloke. He's a good man. And, you know, to me, I really want to get behind the people that have got behind us. And I want to encourage all of you out there to really get behind Campbell. Campbell, I want to thank you for your stand, coming out of a peaceable life in business and serving and serving the community. I kind of relate to you in that because I was sitting there running my business and I saw Scott Morrison come back from the G7 and something just stirred my heart and went, I smell a rat.
Pat, if I can just say, it is about service. That's what I want to do. And look, if after this weekend I don't get up, I won't be disappointed for me at all, because I'll go back to doing what I do and I enjoy it, and life will be a lot quieter and easier. But I just say to people, you know, my pitch to you is I want to serve you as I did formerly in politics and in the Australian Army for 13 years. You got someone who understands, as I was saying before, the way the bureaucratic and the political system works. I'm no neophyte. I'm no blow-in. I'm not going to have to learn the hard way those intricacies, and I can get to work straight away, fighting for you, holding the blowtorch to people. I've got that experience and knowledge to get going straight away, and I just offer myself. That's what I'm doing. I'm offering myself for service. If people would like to get behind me, I'd be really appreciative, but it's totally up to you. And if people do like the Lib Dems, by the way, we'd like you to also look at our House of Reps candidates around the nation and the other Senate candidates in New South Wales, people like John Ruddock or David Limbrick in Victoria, Kate Fentanyl in WA, etc.
Who have you got in Tasmania? Some bloke called Topher Field, I hear.
Topher Field. Well, you might actually let him plug himself shortly, mate.
We've got Topher coming on later, and Campbell, thank you. James, anything you want to say to Campbell before we bring our new guest on?
Look, Pat, we did promise to ask the hard questions, and so I've got to say, Campbell, I'm a fan, but there's two issues that bother me with the Liberal Democrats, and you won't be surprised. And they're probably not key election issues right now, but we're watching what's happening with the abortion debate in America. And the New South Wales Parliament has just been considering euthanasia. Just talk to me about where the Liberal Democrats stand on those two issues.
Well, again, we're libertarians, so we tend to have we have the view that really government shouldn't be interfering in one's own life. So for me, the euthanasia issue is easier to explain because as far as I'm concerned, it's my life and the state doesn't have any right to tell me how I choose to check out. My late mother was deeply religious, yet she was a very strong supporter of voluntary assisted dying, as am I. And so it's a matter of the public record that I did support that here in Queensland. I believe, though, that palliative care options need to be strengthened and better resourced, and that's a key thing before you actually go down the road of adopting VAD in any jurisdiction. So that's critically important. But I do support it, and I've written, for example, op-ed pieces for the Courier Mail going back a few years ago. I think it was in 2019. If people really want to see what I'm coming from, abortion's more difficult. Abortion involves two people, the unborn and the woman. And whilst I support abortion in the early stages of pregnancy, I'm deeply concerned. Well, frankly, no, that's not the right word. I'm actually horrified. It's really what I've said before. I say again now, I'm horrified by what's been introduced here in Queensland. Late-term abortion is repugnant and horrific. And if people really knew what was going on, I think there'd be a greater backlash against in the community. You had George Christensen on before. One Nation have a policy checklist in terms of what they think should happen on this matter, and I totally support them. Things like an anaesthetic for not only the mother but also the unborn child. That a child actually born alive has to be then saved, that late-term abortion doesn't happen, that extensive counselling resources are put in place, and that sex-selective abortion shouldn't be permitted at all. So those are things that George has put on the table. I support him. Again, I do. At the end of the day, though, in the first weeks of a pregnancy, I believe it's tolerable, but late-term abortion is repugnant and shouldn't be allowed.
Campbell, thanks for your input tonight. And as I've looked, to me, I know where I stand on that. And again, I kind of look at someone that's 6 foot and someone that's 6'2", and they got 2 inches of differences. And I know the Christian community where they stand on that, but I want to thank you for standing again and serving the community again. You're a good man. Can I ask you, mate, if it doesn't work out for you Saturday, can you come and take over Queensland again? Please.
No.
Oh
well, look,
God.
no, I will stop joking. Here's the go. The Lib Dems are determined to actually make a difference in Queensland as well. So we've got some fantastic candidates in this election. I can't name them all, but people like Toby, who's standing for the seat of Ford Toby Sutherland, people like Diane Dimitri on the Gold Coast, Alex Forbes, and a whole lot of other people. And we've got great candidates interstate, as I've said already. But here in Queensland, if we're not successful, if any of us are not successful, or put it this way, we will be back for the state election because Queenslanders do deserve better. They do deserve an alternative to a Liberal National Party that's lost its way and won't stand up and fight anymore.
Thank you, Campbell.
Campbell, I've got to say, you've got a
bless
good
you.
candidate. So you've got a good candidate in New South Wales too, in John Ruddock. He's a good man.
Oh, absolutely.
Good man.
Look, across the nation, we've got, the last check, we've got over 115 people standing. Never had that before. A big shout out to all of them. By the way, I've been pleased today to be talking to Pete Rothwell, who's our candidate for Parks, and how I think he's doing really well. So if you're there, Pete, good luck, mate.
Well, thank you, Campbell, and appreciate you very much taking time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Campbell.
You're welcome. Now, James, you have just launched something brand new. Look, tonight, guys, everyone out there, you got to know that my business and everything we do, we fund this, and as well as our partners, and with the great support of likes of James. James is a brilliant writer. Follow him on Spectator magazine. Listen, we've still got Senator Alexander. We've still got Craig Kelly to come on. We've still got Lyle Shelton. We've still got Topher Fields. So much more. But James, where can people find you, and how can we jump on board? Because you're a brilliant writer. I steal all his stuff, folks. Where can we find you, James?
Yeah, so you can get a daily email from me. So it's an article every morning right in the inbox at 6 a.m. on faith, politics, culture, just examining whatever the issue of the day is. So you go to James McPherson, MacPherson, jamesmcpherson.substack.com, or just Google James McPherson Substack, and you just sign up there. It's free, and every morning you get an article on the issue of the day straight to you. So, and you do steal most of my stuff, Pat.
I do. Now, look, before we bring in our next guest, and a great guy that really stood out and stood against his own leaders, I want to offer everyone, I'll talk about this more later on at the end, but our organisation, I wrote a book 2 years ago at the start of the pandemic called Unbreakable. And I know many of you have it, but many of you don't. And I would love for you to have a copy of Unbreakable. Now, what we will do, we'll give you the audio book, and we will give you the download of that book. And this Wednesday, one of the big things that I believe in is if you give government or anyone, a boss, the power to feed you, you will give them the power to starve you. So I'm going to ask my team to put up the link, firstly, to our gift, which includes the decisionday.com.au/gift. There it is there. It'll be also in the chat. You can get your book, the audio program, and our financial freedom event this Wednesday. Now, there's about 80 spots left. Our Zoom can only take so much. If you don't want the book and you just would like to come to our financial freedom event, we are speaking about crypto. We speak about shares. We speak about all kinds of stuff. This month, it's on the area of crypto. My portfolio grew 389%. One of my clients made a staggering amount of money in the last few months. You'll be hearing his testimony on Wednesday. So if you'd like to get that as well, if my team could put up the link just for the event, okay, so you can do the gift, which is there, and you get the gift, the book, the audio, and you also get the webinar, but you've got to fill in the details. Or if you just want to be part of Wednesday, you go to www.mercedes.com/JJ. Listen, screenshot that or click on the link if there's a link in the chat. Hopefully it won't cut you off. Or screenshot it right now. Grab a phone, screenshot it, and go and register. Don't wait. Don't say, I'll do it later. Do it tonight, because once those spots are full, they are full. One of the heroes of the Liberal Party, and there's not many of them out there, I got to say. One of them is Tanya Davies, a young lady that I've known since she was a teenager, but another one is an outstanding gentleman, Senator Alexander. This guy I met in Adelaide crossed the floor and stood for our freedoms. And tonight I've asked him to come on. He's not up for election, but this guy is a walking embodiment of wisdom and justice, and he's for the people. So, Senator, thanks for being on tonight.
Oh, thanks, Pat. Thanks for that wind-up. That's pretty hard to live up to. I'll do my best, but I've never been called wise before. I'm very flattered by that. It's extraordinary.
Well, you are wise, because sometimes I ask you questions and you just wisely, hey, the ones I texted you, which will leave, they were brilliant. James, have you met Alex before?
I haven't, but Alex, I'm a big fan because you just created a wonderful moment for me when you asked Professor Brendan Murphy, what is a woman? And I got to say, that was one of the greatest moments of television that I've seen in a long time, and I want to thank you for it.
Yeah, it was great.
It was. I promise. It was actually quite an interesting little piece because we put it up on online, and if you notice in that clip, after it's asked, there's silence and then coughing, almost theatrically, and people were asking me, "Did you superimpose that?" I mean, it really just was extraordinary, and we didn't, of course. It just happened naturally. We superimposed the tumbleweed going down across there, but we didn't. That was all very different. But it was just, look. It was the sort of thing that Senate estimates, I think, are really for. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going through lines of budgets and all the stuff that you expect, but the value in it for me is to really get an opportunity to drift into and ask the bureaucrats questions that perhaps don't get asked and should be, and that's one of them. I think it really highlights where we're up to in this country. The bureaucracy in this nation is leading us on the nose, I think, and that was a great example of it.
Alex, you crossed the floor.
Can I ask you a question on?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, James. Sorry.
Sorry, Pat. If I can just follow that up, because the thing that has made me curious is why hasn't our Prime Minister? I mean, he's backed Catherine Devers in Warringah here in the North Shore of Sydney. But surely this is a big issue, the whole transgender debate, protecting women's sport. And it seems to me like the Liberal Party has been a bit of hokey pokey, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Why haven't the Liberal Party made a big issue of this? Surely there's enough so-called quiet Australians who really want to see a political party take a strong stand on this, particularly those of us that are concerned about our wives, our daughters, and our girlfriends.
Yeah, look, it's a great question. Look, I think the answer to that is it probably goes back to something that Campbell was saying. It's a shame that we've even got to the point where we're having to talk about this. I mean, we're in a position of, economic uncertainty globally. We've got all of that stuff happening, and we seem to be talking about, men playing women's sport. So that's the first thing to observe here, I think. And there's a lot of other stuff going on. What I should say is, of course, you'd be familiar with Senator Claire Chandler's Save Women's Sport bill, which is coming up. The Prime Minister's indicated that he supports it. And many of us, I think, are very keen for that to be taken as a government bill, which hasn't happened yet, but there is still time for that when the Parliament resumes. And I'd be hopeful that it would, because we know that something like 70 or 80% of Australians think that it is absolutely preposterous that blokes are playing in women's sport. And anyone that's, has children or has, sisters and wives that are playing, they really don't want blokes playing. And it's, you only have to look at the last 5 years to think how far we've drifted already. To think that that's even a talking point at this time in history is really, really odd. So, look, I think the answer to that is I think the Prime Minister's focused on a lot of other stuff, the economy, and I think this is a chance. I'm putting words into the mouth here, but I think this is a chance, and certainly I know there's a lot of support for it from our side of Parliament in order to support Senator Claire Chandler's great work on that bill. We need to see more of it. I agree with you on that. I think there need to be as many voices for quiet Australians as there can be in the Australian Parliament, and that's very true.
Alex, can I just quickly?
Yep.
Can I just quickly?
No, go for it.
And I'm not having a shot at you, Alex. I'm a fan, but when you say things like, it's ridiculous we've even got to this point, I got to admit, I feel like that's a bit disingenuous, because surely our political leaders allowed it to get to this point by not nipping it in the bud. And they let the conversation run until it does get ridiculous, and then politicians complain, "Oh, it's ridiculous we're even talking about it." I just wish that our political leaders would deal with these things. Now, our Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said he doesn't want to get involved in the culture wars. He's about jobs. Well, a lot of Christians are very concerned about the culture wars because that's what our children are learning in schools. And so, I appreciate you really bringing it up at the Senate estimates hearing, but I just wish that our political parties, especially our so-called conservatives, grasped the nettle a little more and didn't just say, "Oh, we're sick of hearing about it." Well, our politicians might be, but for those of us at home, we want to hear some strong statements about this. And again, not a shot at you personally.
And not taken that way at all. And I get you and I hear you. And actually, I have to say, you're repeating sort of things that I've said a lot as well, I have to say. There is probably a significant portion of my time in Parliament so far that has been spent on the culture wars. And I get pilloried for it. I get pilloried for it by, Crikey and whatever other, rubbish outlets there are. And I think the point is that it is so important. I mean, I really can't stress the importance enough. I think there is a perception in some parts of politics that it's a bit beneath people's dignity. There's that sort of,
right.
Well, that's just silly stuff, naming and pulling down statues and all that sort of thing. But we know that culture or politics is downstream from culture, and culture is so important to the art of politics. I mean, we see it everywhere. The media talks lines, politicians pick them up. They see things in movies, yes. The public picks it up. That's the very pop culture side of it, but it's true across the board, and it really does have a massive influence. And this is the long march through the institutions. We've now got, I think, the tail end of the march. I keep saying, I think for those that are worried about the long march through the institutions, they need to understand that march is over. People are at the other end of the march smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey because it's done. Like, the march is done, and until Conservatives get back into politics, and this is the point, this is really the point, that politics needs to be populated by Conservatives wherever we go. It means we need them inside the Liberal Party and inside all parties, and that's a critical point.
Alex, on Saturday, look, we may or may not have a government, who knows, but regardless of the result, what can Conservatives do to make their voice heard on Saturday? How do we make a sound that sends a message?
Well, look, I mean, it's not going to surprise you to hear that I'm going to say that the best thing people can do is to vote Liberal. Now, I know that people have had their fair share of gripes, and I know they're out there, and I know that, we've heard all of that. But the reality here is what we cannot do, and this is particularly from South Australian point of view, where we've just elected a Labor-Green alliance in this state. What we cannot do is run the risk of a Labor-Green alliance federally as well. And unfortunately, from where I sit, the difficulty with people toying with their vote is that it does run the risk of splintering it and Labor and the Greens running through the middle. And that's what really, really concerns me here. I get it. I hear all of the frustration. I hear it every single day of my life. But the reality is here, in politics, there really are only two teams on the field, red and blue. We can't afford a red team in Canberra. In South Australia alone, and I know there are varying degrees of this because each state's on their own cycle, but in the last 12 to 48 months, we've had one attempt at legalising prostitution. We've had a successful and odious termination of pregnancy bill, a late-term abortion bill passed. We've had attempts at conversion therapy being introduced, and we've had a euthanasia bill passed in this state. Now, that was in circumstances where we had a Liberal government, but we had Liberal governments in state and federal. Now, when Labor and the Greens, or if Labor and the Greens get hold of the strings of power, both federally and at state level, you can open the doors. You can absolutely open the doors to this radical agenda. That's what worries me. So from where I sit, people have got to stay the course. Stay the course, have some faith, but the important thing is that they get involved in grassroots politics. So I cannot stress that enough, and I talk about it all the time. I talk about it until I'm blue in the face. But the reality is, politics is like a game of football. There's only ever those two teams on the field, and as much as I respect all of the minor party colleagues that have been floating around tonight, the minor parties are only ever going to be shouting from the grandstands. What we need are Conservatives inside the party that will make government, which is the Liberal Party. So we're pre-selecting Conservative candidates so that we're making sure that the parties are run by Conservatives all the time, and in that way we'll ensure the policy agenda is properly set all the time.
James, last question to the Senator, and I've got to bring someone into my room, a guest that we're going to be speaking to. But last question to Alex.
I was going to ask you, when are you running for Prime Minister, Alex? But failing that...
Who was the last one to come from the Senate? I think it was Gorton, wasn't it? I don't think it'll be me.
Who was the last one from South Australia?
Yeah, I don't think it was... Well, Bob Hawke was from Bordertown. There you go.
He was Labor. He doesn't count.
True.
Hey, let me combine two issues quickly and see if we can do this briefly. We talked with the guys from One Nation about the World Health Organization's Pandemic Prevention and Preparedness Treaty. Craig Kelly talked about that at the press club today. The Australian said his claims were bizarre, but George Christensen and Malcolm Roberts tend to believe that it's a real thing, and that Australia may well sign up to it. I wanted to ask you about that, but before I do, Scott Morrison, I think, surprised a lot of us when he came back from overseas, having signed us up for net zero by 2050, which we weren't expecting. I don't remember him taking that to an election. What confidence do we have in the Liberal Party that they're not going to sign us up to these international treaties? We've got net zero. Are we going to end up with the World Health Organization breathing down our necks, telling us what we can and can't do in the event that there's another pandemic?
Yeah, well, it's a great point. I read those comments today from the Press Club as well. And it's very timely, in fact, because I've actually just written to the Foreign Minister, even in caretaker mode, just today, and published that letter on my Facebook page, Senator Alex Antic. You can find it there. And I share those concerns, I have to say, and I don't make that with any particular commentary towards our side of politics. I make it as a general, broad, bipartisan approach, regardless of the result on Saturday. The issue is that there are two things that are at play here. The first one is the end of this week, I think Sunday, the World Health Organization, the WHO, controlling body is going to meet to discuss these amendments to the international health regulations. And they've been proposed by the Biden administration. And what they're really seeking to do is to give more power to the World Health Organization to make diktats about health and pandemics and all that sort of thing. We haven't seen the global pandemic treaty as it's being known yet. It's been floated, it's been proposed. But if it's anything like the amendments to the international health regulations, then we have to resist it at all costs. And I've made that point to the Foreign Minister, and I can't stress it enough. It's a bit like grappling with a ghost. We don't really know what we're dealing with. But if this is the case, that we are looking at signing a treaty that effectively gives the WHO powers to declare pandemics, to dictate control of medical treatment and so forth, and also importantly gives the power back to countries like Australia to tie legislation of its own to that treaty organisation using the external affairs power, then that is something that I have no interest in at all. So I don't know any more about it than that. I've made those inquiries as well. But regardless of the result on Saturday, we cannot give any more power to the World Health Organization than we already have. We cannot give any more power to the global bureaucrats that seek to interfere with our own sovereignty. And it is as clear as that from where I sit.
Senator, thank you so much for being on the program tonight. I know you've got a busy schedule. I know you're not up for election, but I want to thank you for taking the stand that you did for our country, crossing the floor. You're a good man, and look forward to seeing you in Adelaide sometime soon.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you. We'll give you a taste of the cold weather down here. It's freezing. You'll love it.
I'll give it a miss. I'll give it a miss. Well,
thanks, Pat. Thanks, James. Good to see you.
Thanks, Alex.
Before I bring on Topher Field in a few minutes, I want to read a letter that got sent to me, and it's from someone in our area of Fadden, who wrote to the current member for Fadden, the Honourable Stuart Robert. And this gentleman received this pamphlet near enough to Anzac Day, which has got Stuart's logo on there, and it's a postal vote. And I got issues with this already, with all these different security questions that are there. And I'm sure some people mistakenly, and I'm certainly not accusing anyone of skullduggery here, but he wrote to Stuart, and this is what he said. You've taken the time to leverage off the heroic sacrifices our Anzacs made by using this day to send out your frankly junk mail, virtue signalling your run to the election. Where have you been for the last 2 years protecting the people's freedoms the Anzacs have given their lives to provide? How dare you use this opportunity to further your agenda, being Anzac Day? You have remained silent while your party has ransacked the lives of thousands around the country, closed businesses, forced people to die alone, just about the entire population forced against their will to take part in a trial. You will be remembered, all right, but not for your efforts to the people, but other persons who you harmed. Anzacs would turn in their grave to hear your story, and that you've used their legacy to issue your weak propaganda in the Post. I suggest you make an honest person of yourself and ask for forgiveness. Now, that was a letter written by a gentleman who I won't read his name out for privacy, but this is what Stuart Robert wrote back. Thanks, mentions the guy's name. As a veteran, and I assume you're not, I'll simply ignore your rant. I did have a look at your website to see your stated values / you have demonstrated none of them, sir. I'll check to see if you have taken advantage of JobKeeper and sold properties on the back of the government property programs. I gather you have. Then he says, this is Stuart Robert, your hypocrisy and your conspiratorial email is the true affront. Now, this is a bit that bothers me. Don't bother replying, but rest assured, this is what Stuart Robert said. We've got it here on paper, Stuart. Be assured I'll remember who you are and who your firm is. Now, question. I don't care what this gentleman wrote to you. Is that how you expect a sitting member, the Minister for Employment, Workforce, Skills, Small and Family Business, and no business, I might add, Acting Minister for Education and Youth, and a Christian man to respond to his constituents? I didn't find a family. That's Siri talking to me there. So I've asked a young man who's sitting in the area of Fadden. His name is Nathan O'Brien. He's standing for the UAP. Nathan, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Pat.
I want to ask you a question. Would you ever write anyone a letter like that saying, don't bother replying, but rest assured I'll remember who you are and whom your firm is. And by the way, I'm going to check up on you and see if you've used JobKeeper, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, I think the problem is, Pat, that our leaders have forgotten who they serve. And they've abandoned their people, and that needs to be corrected. That's the biggest challenge we have as a result of this last 2-year period that we've been living through.
Now, you're standing in the UAP.
I am.
With Clive and Craig.
Yep.
Let me ask you, why, and we've got Craig coming on, by the way, later on, which is going to be huge. So you're kind of like the, you're the pre, you know. What can you do for the people of Fadden? What can you do? I know you're a great Christian guy, great family. What can you do for the people of Fadden and the people of Australia, really? Because your party represents all of them.
Let me start with Australia and then zoom into to Fadden.
Yep.
Our country right now, it needs national direction, it needs national correction, and we also need national protection. And the policies that the United Australia Party are putting forward offer those 3 areas. And so, you know, the biggest challenge we have right now, COVID hasn't rendered Australia to its knees. It's our current sitting government.
Yeah.
We need to see change.
Wow.
We need to see change. So these policies that Clive and the party executive are putting forward are, number one, to address our debt. It's something that is not being addressed at all by any of the other parties. In fact, and let me ask you, can you name me one policy that the incumbent government is running on this campaign?
They released one today, which I can't work out how people get. Let's leave it alone. No.
Yeah. So right now we need to address that debt. Those that were watching the National Press Club today would have heard that we are in over $1 trillion of debt. So that's over $1 million. And the only plan that the incumbent government has is to Labor Australians to pay off that debt. We want to see our trading partners pay down that debt and retire that debt in 20 years.
Yep.
Unless or until we address that debt, we can't do anything else. We are stymied. And so,
Now, let me ask you. You work a job like everybody else does, and why, I mean, like Campbell did, why did you decide to stand in the area of Fadden? Because we want to help you, and I've got to tell you, this guy's a good guy. Why did you stand in this area? What prompted you?
I have 2 reasons, and they're my 2 kids. Those 2 kids, the future that they're growing up in and the country that they're growing up in is under threat. The very soul of our nation is under threat. And when I looked around to see who represents the thoughts and values that I have, I didn't see it. Traditionally, Liberal Party for me has been the hope of the side. But, you know, case in point, what you just mentioned there, they've failed us. And so the opportunity was to stand, and so I decided to stand.
What will you do for the people of Fadden? It's a pretty big area. Nice area, by the way.
Nice area. You know, last week we had the opportunity, every candidate in Fadden had the opportunity to come together and speak with some locals. And the only person who didn't show was the incumbent member. I came home that night just to post something on social media, And I read in the news that, in fact, the funding is now in question with this, with the Coomera connector. Oh. And so already, whilst we've been virtue signalling and being very politically correct over the last 2 years, we've now got to pay the bill. Yeah. And that bill is now affecting infrastructure. But it's going to continue with healthcare, aged care, childcare, education, and it's going to continue until it's addressed. So unless or until that is addressed, the only way we can help the people of Fadden is by, first of all, addressing that debt at a national level. And the UAP have a plan and a policy to do so.
I want to say something here for people like Nathan. And it's all okay for us to post and do things, but what these guys need is volunteers. They don't have the slush fund that Labor and Liberal do. They don't. These guys are stocked up and cashed up. But these guys are not. You say, well, you know, what about Clive Palmer? Can I say this? It's our responsibility for us all to do it's about equal sacrifice. And I'm saying this whether it's for Nathan or whether it's for Campbell or whether it's for One Nation. This guy here in the area of Fadden needs help. He needs volunteers. So I asked him to come and give you all a shout out because he's a good man. He's a man of high values, high morals. Actually, I've known him since he was a teenager. And so he's got my endorsement, my full backing as a person and for what he stands for. Can I encourage you? Nathan, what do you need? What do you need help in right now?
We have 33 polling booths across the seat of Fadden. And especially on Saturday, we need to fill every polling booth. We need your help to be standing for freedom. This election is arguably the most significant election of our nation's history, and we simply need people to be there as a final reminder on that final mile before people walking to make their vote, to hand out our how to vote cards, and just make sure that at the last minute, we're saying to everybody, don't vote as you've always voted, but in fact to just stop, take 5 seconds and actually look at what some of the key policies are. Now, our freedom is what is under threat. And I promise you, if the wrong people get elected in a few days' time, we are being locked down again. And it's a matter of time. In fact, it goes further than that. If you look at what the World Health Organization is proposing, we are essentially, unless we pull out of our groups like the World Health Organization, we're handing over our policies to China.
You almost got it right. I thought you were almost going to say the World Whore Organization. And you don't get mad at me or you Christian folk for using the word whore. The Bible speaks about the whore of Babylon. Now, Nathan, where can we get in contact with you? Where can the good people of Fadden or anyone around the Gold Coast here, how can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, thank you, Pat. If you want to email me, please do. You can reach me at fadden@unitedaustraliaparty.org.au and I'll pick that up and we can put you to work. We've only got a few days left. There's not months, there's not weeks, we've only got days. So we need all hands on deck. Most polling booths are open to 8 p.m. each night. So even if you can work during the day, come and hand out some flyers of a night time. Or we're seeing people come in just during their lunch shift and hand out flyers.
Great.
But we just need more people. So yeah,
Nathan, thank you. Thanks for standing. Now I think there's a link that the guys will bring up there. What's that email again? Say it nice and slow.
Fadden, Fadden @unitedaustraliaparty.org.au.
And of course, the boys will put up a link there. But hey, Nathan, thanks so much for being part of tonight.
Thank you, Pat.
And
thanks for all you do.
All the best, and let's make some change.
Good one.
James, are you there?
I'm still here, Pat.
Good, good. Well, our next guest is someone who, well, kind of became an, how do I call it? I just straighten my chair here. An unlikely hero. Didn't ask for it, but he really rose up. And he's really shaken the likes of Dan Andrews down there. And this guy's one of my heroes. The Bible talks about the least of these, and sometimes it's the least of these that rise up. And Topher Field has become such a voice, such a hero. He's standing for the Liberal Democrats, but I've invited him to come on tonight and just let him loose. Topher, how are you?
Mate, I'm doing very well, thank you. That is a very generous introduction. The word hero is one that means a lot and should be used very sparingly, so it means a lot. Thank you.
Well, I meant it because you did it, mate, and the documentary was brilliant. And what you've done, I mean, the day that they arrested you, I'll never forget it. My phone kept buzzing. Can I ask you, just as a dad and a husband, and then we'll ask some other questions, how did you feel that day when they came in and arrested you in your own home in front of your kids?
Mixed feelings. I mean, obviously, it's horrifying that this is what's happening now in a so-called free country. But at the same time, I was by no means the first. There were other people that suffered far worse than what I did. So it wasn't a surprise at the same time. Even though it should never have happened, it didn't catch us out. So really mixed feelings. I do have to say, I've said it many times, I want to acknowledge it again. The individual officers that were sent to my home went out of their way to try and make it as non-confrontational and non-traumatic for my family as they possibly could. Were they abusing human rights and doing the wrong thing? Yes, they were. But they also did go out of their way to try and do it in a way that was not traumatic for my kids, which I did appreciate. But it's an interesting thing when for me, I kind of sit there and go, I don't feel like I have any other choice, because my conscience won't allow me to not stand, right? My conscience won't allow me to take the easy road and just walk away and just go, oh, so that's someone else's fight. I'll let someone else do that. That's not the way I'm wired. And so when these sorts of moments come along, there's just a sense of just, okay, plod along, just keep on standing, keep on doing what you're doing. There isn't really, in the moment, there isn't a sense of that weight of history that there can be afterwards. But in the moment, it's just a case of, okay, well, this is what I have to do.
Topher, you did a brilliant video, and we don't have the equipment how to do it now, explaining the way our voting system works. Could you give us a synopsis of that? Okay. And then I want to ask you a question, why you're doing what you're doing now.
It's very, look, the way the Australian system is actually really, really brilliant. And I don't think it's appreciated enough and given enough credit for what it is. I was listening when Senator Alex Antic said before that there's really only two horses in the race. And I want to be clear, Senator Antic is someone that I have genuine admiration for. And you know that I choose my words carefully. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. So when I say admiration, I mean it. However, he's entirely wrong when he urges people to vote for the Liberal Party at number one, as though that's really the only way to fight this. I completely disagree with that. The Australian system was specifically designed so that you could vote for whichever party best represents you, no matter how small that party, no matter how insignificant their chance of winning may be. You vote for them confidently. Because if they don't win, if they do get eliminated from the count because they got the least out of everybody, your vote lives on. And the preferential system ensures that you can vote for number one for whoever represents you best, number two for the next best, number three for the one that you go, I guess they're not as bad as the others, number 4 and 5 for the ones where you're holding your nose and you're like, oh, they stink, they're terrible, but they're not as bad as that last one. And you can do that. And if the ones that you want to win get eliminated, your vote lives on and passes from one to the next until eventually it sticks and you still influence the outcome, even if your preferred option doesn't win. So I would say to Alex Antic, if someone agrees with Alex and says, well, I would much rather the Liberal Party win instead of the Labor Party, put the Liberal Party in front of the Labor Party, sure. But in front of both of them, put the freedom-friendly parties. And I would especially want to point out that in Victoria, during the height of the lockdowns, the most lockdown city in the world, there was only one political party that was actually standing up for freedom. And sadly, it was not the Liberal Party. It was the Liberal Democratic Party. The Liberal Party under Matthew Guy and under their former leader were pretty much non-existent. And David Limbrick, who is running for the Senate now in Victoria, he was a member of the upper house in Victoria, and he became the de facto leader of the opposition as an upper house member for the Liberal Democratic Party. There were only 2 Liberal Democratic Party members, but they became the de facto opposition because they were the only ones with the courage to speak out. So I would really urge people, you may agree with Senator Antic, you may want to put the Liberals in front of Labor, but do that down the bottom of your ticket. And at the top of your ticket, put the freedom-friendly parties that actually have the guts to say what needs to be said. And no disrespect to Senator Antic, he does say what needs to be said, but his party does not. And I'll finish the answer on this point. The Liberal Party have held power. They have had the prime ministership. They've had government more often than not for the last 30, 40, 50 years. Where we are today is not in spite of the best efforts of the Liberal Party. It's because of the Liberal Party. They are the ones that led us to where we are. They've had power for the vast majority of certainly my lifetime. And for Senator Antic to sit there and say, oh, we really need a Liberal government, and then to give us a bunch of examples from South Australia of all the terrible things that the Liberal government have allowed to happen, I find myself sitting there going, he's a very intelligent man, and I know that he must know this in his heart, but he destroyed his own argument by saying we need a Liberal government. Oh, but here are the terrible things the Liberal government did in South Australia, but it would be even worse under a Labor Party. Well, I'm sorry, but it doesn't work like that. It's not a two-horse race, no matter how much the major parties may say that it is. You can vote for somebody else. And the best hope that we have is for freedom-friendly minor parties to seize the balance of power in the Senate, maybe in the lower house, but that's probably being a bit optimistic, certainly in the Senate, and to be able to hold the major parties to account.
I want to say this to everyone because I love this guy, and I mean it as a brother. This guy, Topher is the real deal. If you're in Tasmania, get behind him. But before I ask him why into politics, please, when you hear freedom-friendly parties, we're not talking about the fake independents. We're not talking about the people that are out there on the climate change and more money to the ABC, like whatever her name is down there. I wrote her name before. I was so upset with her earlier on today. What's that lady down there in New South Wales, Topher? Zeldy, whatever her name is.
Zali Stegel.
Pardon
That's
me?
when you're trying to think. Zali Stegel.
That's the one. That's the one. And here's what I don't get. I just saw tonight on Sky News these independents who are supposed to be independent of each other. Watch this. Independent of each other, representing 4 or 5 different political parties, and all the girls have got a day out together going hands together. Woo! These are undercover Labor, Green, leftist fascists. I'm telling you, and I got no problem saying that. So please don't get confused. For goodness sake, that anything that says independent. Look, we'll give you a list. Topher, give us a list and then tell us why you got involved. Give us a list of the freedom-friendly parties. I mean, we've got GAP, we've got IMOP, we've got
GAP,
you.
IMOP, Federation Party, the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party are also really good on many other areas, not just on shooters, fishers and farmers. We have the Liberal Democratic Party that I'm a member of and I'm running as the lead Senate
One
candidate.
Nation, of course, UAP.
UAP. Now, I would. There's a reason why we're in separate parties. This is worth having a quick chat about. There's a reason. There are differences between us. There's a reason why we're not all in the same party. I would argue, and of course I'm biased, so take it with a grain of salt. I would argue that no one in the Australian political landscape, including the major parties, understands economics the way that the Liberal Democratic Party do. And we actually have an economist as our party president. We have multiple economists as either candidates or senior in the party itself. We understand how money works. And I'm sorry, but if you get the money side of government wrong, there's kind of not a lot else that matters because everyone suffers as a result. So my point is there are differences between us, but there are many, many parties that are infinitely better than the two-party duopoly. And I would say, along with Liberal and Labor, I would also add the Greens and Nationals. Those 4, they are the ones that have had power between them. They've had power or the balance of power for the last, 30, 40, 50 years. They are the ones that led us to where we are. The time has come to hand the balance of power to somebody else. Now, I would love that to be the Liberal Democratic Party, but you know what? We may not be your flavor. I may not be your flavor, and that's fine. So vote for UAP, vote for One Nation, GAP, IMOP, AFP, Shooters, Fishers, Farmers. There's so many to choose from. Find the one that really does suit you, but don't just vote for them and then vote for a major party. Vote for the freedom-friendly minor party that suits you best, then vote for another one. Then vote for another one. And don't vote for any of the major parties until you've listed all of the freedom-friendly minor parties in your area. You're absolutely right, though. There are fake independents. The Climate 200 mob, they actually share a lot of their funding. Not all. There's a few except, but they share a lot of their funding. They certainly share their ideologies. And, what makes them independents? If their funding is coming, broadly speaking, their funding is coming, a lot of it, from the same place. Their ideology is coming broadly from the same place. The only reason why they can call themselves independents is because they haven't united under a single brand. Oh, but wait a minute, they have the Climate 200 brand. So I actually fail to see how these people can even call themselves independents. In what way are they independent? That doesn't make sense to me. They are a party, and they are... going to be incredibly destructive if they are given
Correct.
the balance.
Correct.
So for them, they are the only people that I would suggest. So the voices of mob and the Climate 200 mob are the only people that I would suggest you put below the major parties, below the Greens, because they are actually worse.
Topher, your documentary was brilliant. And where can we find it? How can we support you? How can we get behind you? You're a good man. How can what can we do?
I appreciate it. For those that haven't seen, I made a feature-length documentary. It's now winning awards around the world, which is just a wonderful feeling. It's won 4 awards so far internationally for best documentary, etc. You can find it at battlegroundmelbourne.com. Battlegroundmelbourne.com. You will have to be logged into YouTube to watch it. It's been age restricted because it shows the brutal reality of what happened on the streets of Melbourne. And so that's something that if you haven't seen that, can I just urge you to watch it and to share it, because we have to remember, we can't forget, we can't let it slip into just history. But why did I run for politics? Well, I've been a political commentator now for 12 years, and I've been asked every single election if I would run, and I've always said no. I finally said yes because a combination of things happened. My wife and I finally decided that we were going to leave Victoria. Now, I've talked about that possibility for a number of years now. It's certainly not been out of the question, but we certainly hadn't made the decision that we were going to do it until just recently. And only a week after we made that decision, you know what, we have to get out of Victoria. I can't drive around Melbourne anymore. It's not the same city that it was. I look around and instead of, nice architecture and happy memories and, that's where that street party was and that festival was. Now I go, that's where Matt Lawson got shot. That's where Anna, the lady in red, got thrown to the ground and hospitalized. That's where we all got shot at the shrine. It's not the same place anymore. So we made the decision we were going to leave. And then John Humphreys, the president of the Liberal Democratic Party, rang me up for the 3rd time this election, may I say, and asked me to run. And I said, listen, mate, I've already said no. You asked me to run in the Senate in Victoria. I said no. You asked me to run in the lower house in Victoria. I said no. And guess what? I'm leaving Victoria now. Don't bother. Don't even bother. I'm not even going to be there anymore. And he said, that's good, because I'm ringing to ask you if you would run for the Senate in Tasmania. And it just landed in this incredibly sort of beautiful way. I mean, I've always loved Tasmania. This is about my 14th trip to Tasmania. My sister lives here. My cousin lives here. I have this real love for the place. And for some strange reason, it had never crossed my mind, hey, I could actually live there. Instead of just enjoying visiting, I could actually raise my kids there. And when those words came out of his mouth and I heard them over the phone, I just went, it was like this light bulb moment. I just went, oh my goodness. I could live in Tasmania. That's incredible. And so I actually ended up really excited, and I talked to my family and we went, yep, you know what, we're going to go for it. So I don't want to be a politician. And I said that to John. I've said that many times over the years, but John reminded me of something else that I've said over the years, and that is that we need more politicians who don't want to be politicians. So my own words kind of got used against me. And so here I am. I'm running for the Senate in Tasmania, an absolutely stunning part of the world. I'm in Tasmania right now on the campaign trail. And I really appreciate the incredibly warm welcome that I've had from Tasmanians.
If I could have both of us on screen, I just want to say something to Topher in front of all of Australia and people around the world. Topher, I know you don't like the word hero, but you are. I saw what you went through. I saw what it cost you in putting together that documentary, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and I saw what they did to you. And look, we've got a lot of people on tonight, a lot of people I highly respect. But, mate, for me as a brother and a brother in faith, you're at the top of the totem pole, mate, and I honour you. I'll be praying for you. I believe God's going to bless you. And people say, Christians shouldn't get involved in politics. That's the problem. Christians need to get involved in politics. Let me throw that last one out at you. People that say that, and I've ranted and raved over the Romans 13, that people don't realise what Paul was writing was a subjective verse, most of it anyway. But why should Christians get involved? Tell us, Topher.
If you think that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics, then you don't understand what faith actually is. Christianity is not some little part of your life, and you've got faith over here, and you've got Christianity over here. So you've got politics over here, you've got your career over here. No. Faith is the big bubble that everything else sits inside. And whether you like it or not, everyone brings their beliefs to their politics. When you have a prime minister who's an atheist, that atheism informs every single decision and every single policy that they pursue. Whether you like it or not, every single person's politics is formed on the basis of what they believe, of their faith. And if you think that Christianity and politics can be separated, then you don't understand Christianity and you don't understand politics. And I'll prove the point this way. Have a look at what's been legislated in Victoria recently, with Daniel Andrews wanting to take control of what Christians can preach, of what they can pray.
Correct.
He churches whether or not they were allowed to open, how many people they could have, what the medical status of their worshippers had to be. And here's the shame, Pat. Most churches said, oh, okay, we'll do what you say.
That's right. That's right.
What
Crazy.
we have right now, because Christians have abandoned politics, we now have a situation where the government is claiming the status of God. And I mean that literally. The government is saying that they will tell you who you worship, when you worship, how many of you worship, whether you're allowed to worship, how you pray, what you preach. They are taking the place of God in the lives of every single Victorian, Tasmanian, Australian. That is unacceptable. I don't care if you think that Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. The fact is, politics is deeply involved in religion and deeply informed by the beliefs of every single person in it, and we need to be there.
Church and state was never meant for the church to keep out of the state. It was about the state staying out of the church. And I want to say it again because like you, Topher, I didn't want to do this. I was running a business, doing a bit of lay preaching until I felt something in my heart when Scott Morrison came back, the G7, all hell vomited on our country. And here's the thing, and the churches and the leaders stay silent. Well, now half their buildings are empty. A good lot of the leadership is out the door. Woke Christianity has destroyed this country. And if we want an awakening, I was amazed that a Christian school in my state, I feel like naming them, but I won't, they sent a year 9 an assignment for the kids to do with a pandemic. The scenario was that everybody had to be jabbed with this thing, and it was a scenario post-COVID, blah, 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 the whole scene. And would the kids answer this question, that if people went out and got the shot and risked their lives, would that spark a revival? And what got me is that idiots, the imbecility of people that have no concept of revival history. I mean, to get me started on this, they have no concept. Number one, revival starts with repentance. Number two, it starts in the heart of one servant that calls a nation to account. Number three, it calls government to account. And here we were in a Pentecostal school. And what got me, another thing that got me, is that we got a Christian school up here in Brisbane that took a stand on what they wanted as values, and a certain community went and literally ransacked the place, and our Prime Minister that week went and did a deal with Labor, throwing the Christian community under the bus. That's why Christians, real Christians, not Christians, I better get our next guest on. Not Christians that want to get up at Christian conferences and smirk there and smile because there's a massive crowd, and then your other cohort mates go and speak at the same conference because they're going to get elected. And then when these Christian leaders have a little bit of a hiccup, what do? These same political leaders that one day are saying, Hosanna, Hosanna, the next day they say, crucify him. I don't want those kind of political leaders and those kind of Christians in Parliament. I want the Topher Fields. I want the Alex Andics. And anyway, that's all I've got to say about that. But anyway, Topher, thanks for being on tonight, mate.
Introduce your next guest, but I just very quickly want to say this. If you are a person of faith, we have work to do.
Absolutely.
Stop trying to be cool. Stop trying to fit in. Read your Bible and recognize that Jesus never did any of those things. What he did was speak the truth. That's what our job is in our world today.
And Topher, we've got to stop this bringing the Bible down to culture. Bring culture and subpoena it before the throne of God and his word. That's what we're called to do, not in judgment, but as salt and light. Topher Field, thank you very much.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Pat. Have a great night.
You're a good man. And by the way, if you're out in Tasmania, get out and support him. Help him man those booths and look after him. James, how good was Topher Field?
He was great to listen to. And Pat, I love it when you get wound up.
Mate, I'm Italian. I can't help it, mate. I don't have a note to follow. I just got to. But do I make sense, James?
Most of the time you do.
Most of the time I do. And that is why you're now the 5th best friend in my life.
I figured I had nothing to lose.
You know what? Here's the thing. I would rather, and you know me from Youth Alive days, James, I would rather have a wildfire and try and get it back in balance than have something that is tepid and it makes no effect at all. So if my passion offends people, I know I get about 15, 20% wrong, but we're here. James?
You know, there's a great quote from, is it Yeats, who says, I can't remember it now, but basically all the wrong people are passionate and all the people who need to be passionate are asleep. And that's a pretty good descriptor of the way our culture is at the moment. So you get as passionate as you want, Pat. I love it.
Thanks. James, you better introduce our next guest. This guy's a hero of yours and mine. Over to you.
Yeah, and our next guest, Lyle Shelton, is a really good friend, both of myself and of Pat's, and will be known to many of our viewers. Lyle began his career as a youth pastor, then he was a journalist, then he was elected to the Toowoomba City Council, but he was nationally known for his role as managing director of the Australian Christian Lobby from 2013 through to 2018, which of course was during the same-sex marriage debate. And Lyle showed great composure, great courage and great clarity, I thought, during that season. In more recent times, he's been a political advisor. He writes regularly for The Spectator magazine. He's got a great blog that you should sign up for. But Lyle Shelton, great to have you with us and looking forward to getting your take on a couple of things. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, James. It's a great privilege to be with you and Pat tonight. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey, Lyle, a couple of things I want to talk to you about. But first and foremost, we've been talking to representatives of the freedom parties. And the freedom parties have really risen to the fore because of lockdowns and mandates. But the fact is, our human freedoms have been gradually eroded for a long time before a virus slipped out of a Wuhan lab by way of anti-discrimination laws in the various states of Australia. And you've got some first-hand experience of that. Since we're making a big deal about freedom, talk to me about how that should be an election issue.
Yeah, look, this is, this has been an issue for a long time, as you said, James. I was involved in a Freedom Party at the last federal election in 2019. Some of your viewers might remember Corey Bernardi's Australian Conservatives. We had a good crack there, and many of us had been involved in the marriage campaign, as I had, and others who had seen what was going on in our culture and the growing loss of freedoms. And what particularly that marriage debate did was weaponised anti-discrimination laws. It weaponised human rights commissions, all these tribunals that we have set up at state and federal level, so that if you want to say that marriage is between a man and a woman, or that there's only two genders, you can find yourself being dragged off in front of one of these commissions, as I have been, and many other people. I'm being represented by the Human Rights Law Alliance. But I'm just someone who's perhaps a little bit well known. Their books are full of people losing their jobs and who are being persecuted because of their Christian or conservative views on marriage. So, look, the pandemic's been amazing in terms of showing the overreach of government, and suddenly we've got all these freedom parties on the scene right now, and that's great. But this has been an issue that's been on a slow burn for a long time. And there's been many good people trying to warn our nation about this, particularly over the last decade or so.
I think to me that's one of the good things that's come out of lockdowns and mandates, that suddenly freedom is an issue. And as you say, there are other things that have not yet been addressed that need to be, but at least freedom is now on the table. as a primary issue, and people are aware that this is a big problem, whether it's freedom from international treaties with supranational organisations such as WHO and the UN, or whether it's state-based anti-discrimination laws. So it's a good thing to have on the table, regardless of what the particular thing that sparked it.
Yeah, it is. But I guess my concern, look, and I'm really glad to see everyone fired up, and I was actually quite surprised, I suppose, when I saw Pat and some other pastors at a conference in February up in Queensland really fired up about the mandates and all the overreach in the pandemic, and I agree with most of it. But I never saw anyone this fired up when the definition of marriage was being changed. I never saw pastors get up at Christian conferences and say what I saw being said about the pandemic overreach. And now I know there's been silence in the overreach in the pandemic, but gee whiz, it was deathly silent during the marriage campaign. And the point I want to make, James, is the mandates are going to go. They will be lifted. People will get their jobs back. I've got no doubt about that. It's already happened in Britain. Teachers, nurses are already back at work. I think it's only a matter of time before the Australian government follows suit. They're not even wearing masks on aeroplanes in America anymore. But what isn't going away is this apparatus that's been put in place over decades by the left to find people who speak against woke orthodoxy. And that's where I think the real freedom battle is. Yes, we've got to keep an eye on the UN and the World Economic Forum. All of these agendas are all very much intertwined. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's there in your grill. It's there hiding in plain sight. But I guess the point that I'm making is that I think there's a bigger freedom battle, and that is the one which the Liberal Party sadly goes along with. They've done nothing to unwind the power of these anti-discrimination tribunals. I mentioned my example. I've been sued by 2 drag queens because I wrote a blog that said they were dangerous role models for children because they present gender fluid ideology to children, etc. That's cost $100,000 so far in legal fees, and there's no end in sight. I still haven't had a hearing in the Civil and Administrative Tribunal, yet no one in Australia should have to go through that for freedom of speech. And as I said, I'm just one person. My lawyers have got case books that are full of people that are suffering, losing their jobs, being hounded out of their employment because of their beliefs on basic things like marriage and gender.
Hey, Lyle, could I, one of the things, I wanted to jump in here because I kind of want a bit of a schedule, but one of the things that I admire what you said about where were these voices. And I've got to tell you, I think the pandemic allowed people to have a voice. I'll give you an example. Someone like me, I had no voice. I had no credential. I had no, and basically the church woke me in a way. And it wasn't until I felt a stirring that I had a voice. And by the way, for people like myself, I was against it. The problem that I believe we have, and goes straight back, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, to the woke-topian pastors who are more concerned with their worship leaders putting their transgender pronouns in there, more concerned about albums on the charts, more concerned about their numbers on a Sunday morning. We could have overturned every single bill if these pastors, and ashamedly Pentecostal ones, now this is me saying it, okay, shut their mouths and did nothing, said nothing, and then have the audacity to put up a prime minister as a pin-up boy at a conference and clap their hands. That's where the blame should go, because it shouldn't be the sheep leading the leaders. It should be the leaders leading the sheep.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Pat. Look, there's been a very sad lack of leadership in the church for a very, very long time, and I think Topher put his finger on it very well. We haven't had a theology of engaging culture. We've had a Gnostic view of our salvation, where we separate the physical world from the spiritual world. It's all God's world. There's no dichotomy there, and that's allowed us to separate the political and the cultural, and just think that for those of us who are Christians, and I know there's many on the broadcast tonight who aren't necessarily people of faith, but this goes to the heart of why the church has disengaged, because we have truncated the gospel and just said it's just about our individual personal salvation and getting to heaven, instead of the gospel actually being about not us getting out of earth to go to heaven, but our job is to bring heaven to earth, to get rid of the hell on earth and to put things to right again, because God loves it all and he owns it all. So that's why we've deserted the political field. And I think that's got to change. And I hope that certainly over the next couple of decades, as more and more people get activated and get involved, as we get a better understanding of what the Bible actually says, a better theological understanding, we can make a better difference in our nation.
James, last question to the amazing Lyle Shelton. Last one.
I feel like defending pastors a little bit, Pat.
Honestly, if they're that precious, seriously, they're the leaders. They're the shepherds.
Sure, but let me say this. I think the world has changed very quickly. We all know that. And I think we have lived in a season, at least in my generation, where we've had a really great run as a country. And I think one of the things that happened was that we were convinced, and I think wrongly, but we were convinced that these issues were little skirmishes on the fringes of culture that really weren't going to be big things or really have an effect. And I think we underestimated, as Alex Antic talked about before, the march to the institutions. And I think a lot of people have genuinely been taken by surprise that so many things that 5 minutes ago weren't even issues now are in our schools, they're in our corporate boards. And I think in fairness to a lot of people, many didn't realise the hour that we were in. And I think now people are realising, leaders are taking stock, and praise God, it's been a great wake-up call for everybody over the last couple of years. And I think now very much people are aware, and it's good to see in newspaper articles, opinion pieces, different conferences around the place, people are starting to rise up and the church is starting to speak out. So I think we need to have a little bit of grace for our leaders and realize it's a tough job leading a church when you've got people, who believe lots of different things. You're trying to keep a church together. You're trying to work out a theology of engagement. I think, Lyle, it's very true. We haven't had a good theology of engagement with culture as opposed to simply running our local church. And so, Pat, I get your frustration. I share it. But at the same time, I think, it's a tough job leading a church. And,
James, I want to get to the question of Lyle, but I don't want to get into an argument here. But when you've got pastors getting up there telling people 95% of blah, 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 go and do what you're told, I've got a problem with that. Because Jesus left, he left the 99 for the one. And that's where I got a problem. And you know what? You're right. We should be a lot more compassionate. But let me just say this. It's up to the shepherds to have the compassion for the flock. I'll leave that one alone. Sheep follow, James. And if sheep could vote, they would vote for the guy that feeds them, even if it's the guy that slaughters them. Let's leave it alone. Last question to Lyle Shelton.
I just reckon our pastors will react a lot better to encouragement rather than flagellation. That's
they
all.
Need to start encouraging people as well. But I'll leave it alone, mate. I'll fight that fight on my own.
Can I just say I love the church, and I know I've been a little bit critical about the church's theology, but I mean that, I want to be gracious about that, but I do think that's where the issue very much lies. I think we've had a misunderstanding of and a truncated view of the gospel, but I love the church, and I'm there every Sunday. I encourage my kids to be there, and the church is definitely the hope, particularly as the church learns to find each other and work together in unity. And that's another thing that's really got to change as well over the next 20 years if we do want to see our country turn back. The church has got to find itself. We can't do it on our own. We can't build our own brand. We've got to work together.
Right. Thank you, Lyle Shelton. And I've got a bit of a schedule there, but thank you, Lyle, for being on tonight. And it's been awesome. Great to see you. Hey, we've got to get back on the road, Lyle. We'll bring James along with us as well.
That'd be great. Look forward to it. Thanks very much, guys.
You're welcome. Look, before
Thanks,
James, we're going to interview our next VIP guest. And before I bring our VIP guest, and I want to say a couple of things. Number one, I am pro-church. This is why I got involved. When they shut the house of God down, that's what got me out of my chair. Number two, I'm very pro-pastors. Very pro-pastors. Number three, I'm pro-Bible. But let me tell you what I'm pro above all those things. Making a stand for righteousness. We were not meant to be silent. And if our voice is silent, for evil to prosper, all good men have to do is be silent. And sadly, I understand the fear that some leaders went through. But I'm telling you, and we can't go back now, we can only go forward. We can't, and we have to learn that we cannot stay silent. We cannot stay silent on important issues. Now, before I bring in our great friend Craig Kelly, let me just say this, and then I'm going to have some closing comments. I want to encourage you all to be assertive in your area of your finances. Listen to me very carefully. Since 2001, I had to build my own livelihood. I couldn't rely on honorariums, didn't have a church to support, and I had to learn. And what I understand is that we can teach you biblical prosperity and abundance, but you've got to have economic empowerment. If you give government and people the power to feed you, you give them the power to starve you. It's our responsibility. Our world has changed. We're not going back the same. It'll never be the same. And we have to pivot and learn. To every crisis, there is an opportunity. Listen to me intently. To every crisis, there is an opportunity. And I am unashamedly want to encourage people to really get a financial education. I'm not talking about being an accountant or this and that, but learn how to handle, learn how to make money, learn how to have a side hustle. Now, the mainstream media don't like me using that word, SMM, and the mainstream media don't like me using the word side hustle, but they're raking in bucks because they're complying. Now, we can cry the blues that we've lost jobs, this and that, or we can be empowered. Now, this Wednesday, I'm running my financial freedom. The guy that's coming to speak is a former youth leader who has really helped a lot of people become financially free and at least support what they have. Our economy is not going to get any better. It is not. Inflation's through the roof and it's not going to change. So we've got to prepare now for the future. So two things you can do. Number one, there'll be a link up there, www.mercedes.com/JJ. Register on that. Click on that link. It'll be in the chat. And you can be part of our webinar on Wednesday morning and Wednesday night. It's free. Now, my team tells me there's about 30 spots left. So go there. Or if you would like, you do it this way. I want to give people gifts. I believe in education. I was raised with not much. Well, I kind of went to school when I wasn't wagging, but I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. But I learned to read, and I love reading. That's why I've written 10 bestsellers. So my book, Unbreakable, which I launched during the pandemic, teaching people where the next transfer of wealth is coming from. I want to gift that to you. Now, my team will put up that link. It's decisionday.com.au/gift. Just follow the link. If I get it wrong, I'm sorry. It is a free book, and I read the audio to you. It's free. People pay, I think, $1.99 for it. We're gifting it to everyone that goes there for free. And also you can register for a webinar on Wednesday. Now, I've got some closing comments. I'm going to let James loose on you as well. We've got one incredible guy that we're bringing on right now. James, are you ready for the big guy, the one that this guy is a legend in my eyes? Ladies and gentlemen, I don't call him big guy because he's big. I call him because he's got a big heart and because he's got a big soul and he's a good man and he's standing for what's right. And as I said, there is no right way to do a wrong thing. And when this guy saw the wrong, he stood up. I want to introduce to you my friend. I'm proud to call him a friend. He's a good man, Craig Kelly. How are you, Craig?
Thanks, Pat. Great to be with you.
I'm introducing you to James. He works for Spectator. He's all right, though.
The Spectator, very, very worthwhile magazine. Always worth the read.
You were
Nice
sensational today. Absolutely sensational today. And
Thank
James,
you. Yeah.
Go ahead, Craig. Sorry.
Thank you. It was down at the press club in Canberra. I had Zali Stegel and Adam Bant up against us, rabbiting on about how they're going to save the world and how they're going to stop bad weather and all these other wonderful ideas. But look, it was a good chance at debate. Look, I congratulate the press club. It's been very hard during this election campaign to get our message out. The media, the mainstream media, has covered this as a presidential campaign. Honestly, the election times should be about the contest of ideas, putting forward ideas how we can improve the nation, putting forward policies and debating policies. It's just been like this sort of gotcha moment the press have run between Mr. Albanese and Mr. Morrison. There's been no discussions of the really important issues, no discussions of the challenges in front of us. It's really been a very disappointing election campaign for the media. But we're still in there fighting. We've got a big advertisement schedule rolling out between now and Election Day. We're getting all our teams organised to be out on Election Day, so we're still fighting, and we'll continue to fight until those polling booths close at 6 p.m. on Saturday night.
James?
Craig, if I can ask you, Craig, what do you think of the two biggest issues from your point of view in this election, and that you would really be pushing if you have balance of power?
Sure. Firstly, there's the economic front we'll have a look at first. Now, I am really concerned about where the economy is heading. Firstly, we've run up $1 trillion worth of debt, mostly with reckless and wasteful spending from both political parties. That debt is pushing up interest rates at the moment. It's leading to a high rate of inflation, and it takes a big chunk out of the expenditure that could otherwise be spent on kids with disabilities and aged care and pensions and hospitals and all the things we need to spend money on in society, which we want to provide to our people. A big chunk of that expenditure now goes on interest on the debt. So that's got to be tackled. The other concern I have when it comes to the economy is, of course, what's going to happen to families as we go through this interest rate increasing cycle with so many people mortgaged up to the hilt. And look, the average mortgage in New South Wales is $800,000 over recent months. Now, a lot of families are going to really struggle to have to find that extra $100, $200, $300, $400, $500 a month to pay their mortgage. And we're going to see enormous pressure on families coming through. I'm really concerned about that. I'm also concerned about some of the basic issues about where government is interfering in people's lives, both nationally and in a global scale. We've got the day after the election. We know the World Health Organization are meeting over there in Geneva, and they're talking about, the vote's not on that day, but they're talking about, it's on the agenda for discussion. They're calling this Global Pandemic Accord, where effectively we will hand over all our nation's sovereign rights to manage a global pandemic or a pandemic in our own country and have to submit ourselves to the rules coming out of the World Health Organization. Now, we've seen these people are controlled and manipulated by the communist Chinese. We've seen what's happening in Shanghai at the moment. That is what they'll have planned down the track if we surrender our powers. Now, no one is even talking about that. I tried to raise that at the press conference today and was sort of told, I was talking some type of rubbish. There's a lot of other very experienced commentators around the world that are awake to what is going on with this sort of global, basically the biggest power grab. It's been described as the biggest power grab by the globalists in our lifetime. We've got to push back. We've got to fight against all those things.
Craig, how would you in the United Australia Party deal with China? I'm obviously aware of what the Bible says about China and other countries, but we have these people that want to take over us camped not too far. And then you've got a guy like McGowan today says that Dutton is a threat to our national security. And what got me is a month ago, 3 weeks ago, Scott Morrison is saying Albanese's name McGowan. Well, mate, I tell you, I couldn't believe when the Prime Minister said that about McGowan, but I couldn't believe that McGowan is saying that Dutton is our national security threat. How would you guys deal with that impending danger?
Firstly, in my experience of dealing with Chinese government officials, and I talk about more the Communist Party leaders and in business there, they respect strength. That's what they respect. And if they see weakness, they'll exploit it. And unfortunately, they've seen weakness down here in Australia. So what do we need to do? Firstly, we have this complete disgrace of this submarine contract, $5.5 billion wasted by the government on this dud submarine contract where they thought they'd take French submarines, nuclear submarines, retrofit them and put a diesel engine in them. Look, these subs are the most sophisticated pieces of equipment on the planet. The idea that you just go and retrofit it with a diesel engine was just a nonsense from the start. It was a political decision which put the security interests of this nation at risk. Political decision by the Liberal Party. $5.5 billion has been flushed down the toilet already on this dud contract. What we need to do, we need to speak to our American friends. There is nuclear submarines that we can lease from the Americans. We can work in a program to get Australian nuclear submariners trained up in Hawaii. We can base these out of Hawaii. We need nuclear subs to protect our nation now. And that is the policy of the United Australia Party, not trying to build something that might be ready in 10 or 20 or 30 years. We've also got to stand up to China. This idea of this net zero, I hear all these teal candidates running around, and I'll call them selfish. They're effectively selfish people. They want to feel good. That's all they're on about, with this myth that they're somehow going to give us better weather and they're all about the environment and it's all lovely, softly. What they are doing is they are surrendering our nation's national competitive advantage. The reason that we are a strong and wealthy nation and a prosperous nation is because we have that down our eastern seaboard, that beautiful black coal seam. That is one of our nation's competitive advantage. It's the gas that we have in the ground. And these people want to surrender that advantage, force us down like a 60% reduction on CO2 emissions by 2030 and net zero in 2050, when China are doing no such thing. China are not reducing any emissions. They're going to continue to increase their emissions out to 2030. And then they said, oh, well, when we get to 2060, we'll work it out what we're going to do then. All these green teal independents are doing is surrendering our nation's competitive advantage. What they are doing will see industry depart Australia. Australian jobs will go and that work will be done in China. That will give the Chinese an economic, political and military advantage over us. And that is what these green independents are standing up and complaining they're going to do at this election. Well, no one in the Liberal Party will call them out. They've been playing, let's feed the crocodile hoping we'll be eaten last. I will. These people are a menace to our economy, they're a menace to our society, and they are putting our nation at risk.
Well, true. James?
Craig, you've talked about the pandemic treaty, you've talked about the folly of net zero. One thing we've not talked about tonight is digital identity and the push, it seems, towards that. We've seen vaccine passports, accepted QR codes. Is the whole digital identity thing, is that really on the horizon? And can you talk to me about that? And you've been in Parliament for a while. What's that all about, and is it a real concern?
Absolutely, it's a real concern. It just is a way that a big government can have more control over you. Now, if government was perfect and everything was fine and there was no threats of corruption, there'd be nothing wrong with it. We know you can't trust government. I've been in there a decade and I can see you can't trust them. And the idea that you would hand over all your digital ID to a government who could then go and give it to private companies without your knowledge should concern us all. The idea of this cashless society, we should concern us all. We've seen what happened in, of all places, Canada. Now, we're not talking about some South American nation. We're not talking about some developing Eastern Bloc nation. We're talking about Canada, a Western democracy. And what the government over there did was that if those that disagreed with the government's policies, they cut them off from their bank account. So they had no way of accessing their funds because the government on the chip on their card had inactivated their chip. So we've got to always have cash available in society, because otherwise you just cannot trust government. You can't trust government to use those powers to try and control the population, to try and crush dissent. Look how we've seen people like Daniel Andrews crush dissent in Victoria. Imagine giving him digital identity powers where he can control and monitor where every citizen goes. We've really got to fight back against this. This is contrary to everything that, as a nation, I believe we stand for.
Craig, I know you're a busy guy, and I could ask you a lot of questions about policies and whatever, but I just want to ask you this. Under your leadership, could you ensure us that we will never have mandates, never have overreach, never have the people of Australia treated like slaves to pharaohs ever again? Can you promise us that?
Absolutely, I can do that. I've been at the forefront of this fight for over 2 years now.
Yes, you have.
I have seen what they've done to our country, that I no longer recognise our nation for what's happened by these medical mandates. The simple idea that a government or your employer can force you, probably force is exact. They say coercion or mandates. It's actually blackmail and extortion are the correct words. They can use blackmail and extortion, threaten you with losing your career, not only your job, but your career, unless you compulsorily undergo some type of invasive medical intervention or inject some substance into your body. Are you kidding me? That is what we have done in this country over the last 2 years. And I just say, shame on every other politician in this country that has stood back and allowed this to happen and gone along with it, or not spoken up and called this out as being wrong. It is simply wrong. It should have never, ever happened. And we've got to make sure it never happens again. And we can do that. We need to amend our constitution we need a Bill of Rights in this country. I was someone that didn't believe in a Bill of Rights. I thought our constitution was strong enough that we didn't need to spell these things out. The last 2 years have shown that I was wrong. We need to make sure this can never happen again. But unfortunately, we know both the major parties, if they are elected, are quite happy with forcing people to undergo a medical intervention. My question is, if they can get away with this, what are they going to get away with next year or the year after that? Or force our kids or our grandkids to do? If they can get away with forcing you to be injected with a genetic, let's call a spade a spade. This is a genetic vaccine. Many medical specialists say it should not be called a vaccine. It is untested. It uses a technology that has never been used in humans before, and they have zero long-term safety data. Now, we're hearing from great doctors like Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Brian Cole, thousands of doctors. In fact, there's 17,000 doctors and scientists that have recently put together a declaration calling for this product to be taken off the market because they no longer believe it is safe nor effective. And yet we've had government bureaucrats forcing this into your system. It has just been such a wrong. It is what we've done. Sorry to go on here, Pat, but we've forgotten everything we've learned over centuries. Freedom of informed consent, freedom of speech, the precautionary principle, first do no harm. They're just not things that came about on a whim. They were principles of our society, fundamental principles that have been developed over centuries. And we've had politicians and bureaucrats throw them all out the window, and now they've created this mess that we are currently in. And when I say mess, it is a mess, Pat. Just have a look at the number of businesses that have been wrecked by this. Have a look at the inflationary pressures that are coming in the economy because the government's borrowed so much money. But worst of all, have a look at the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, the death data for January 2022.
Craig, I want to ask you a question, and because I've got to wind up in a few minutes, and then James, I'm going to give you the final words, but I want to ask you a question, and I'd like you to answer it not from Craig Kelly, the politician, or Craig Kelly, the leader of the UAP. I want to ask you to answer it as a father. Why do you love Australia, and why should people vote for you?
We're a very special place in the world. If you look at Australia, how we're made up of people from all around the world, how we've come together to create a society of unparalleled harmony around the world. Yeah, sure, there's problems that we've got here and there, but being Australian, when you are a first Australian overseas, being Australian, it sort of used to really mean that you were this sort of strong, individualistic, confident, outgoing person with a little bit of disdain for authority. And that was why our Australian troops throughout the First and Second World War were so admired, because they had that individualistic about them. You know, if they got orders from head office that didn't make sense or didn't work out, they could improvise on the ground. And I just fear we're losing all that. We just feel I never thought that Australians would succumb to such pressure as they have. That so many Australians would be happy to see their fellow Australians locked down, to see freedom of speech trampled upon. I just feel that those real fundamental things that I loved about Australia, that I thought made us unique, I don't know if they're there today. And we've got to fight to get them back. That's what we've got to do. And it's not for us. It's not for us, Pat. I'm in my late 50s. I think you're probably a similar age. It's not for us, Pat. It's for future generations of Australians. We want them to enjoy and to understand and have the great times that we had in our life, without this overbearing overreach of government breathing down their neck and sort of squashing their rights and liberties.
Craig, I love hearing from you. James, is there anything you'd like to ask Craig before I let you loose, James?
Look, I didn't really have a question so much as a comment, Craig. And, I was looking at the news today. Obviously, you've been at the National Press Club, and the media has described you as rogue parliamentarian, controversial MP. Craig Kelly makes bizarre claims. And then I listened to you talk, and you're talking about freedom from lockdowns, freedom from mandates, a sovereign policy that protects us from threats such as China, avoiding the zero emissions madness. I just think it's incredibly unfair that people like yourself and others that we've had on tonight just do not get much of a run in the media. And when you do, the media make light of very important issues you're raising. I didn't say much of a question, more as a comment that I admire you for leaving the Liberal Party and moving to a place where you could speak freely about these very important issues and being brave enough to do it in an environment that's pretty hostile. So credit to you. I have great admiration for you and all the other guests we've had on tonight.
Beautifully said, James.
Wait, just quickly comment. Look, you're 100% right. The media has let our nation down, the mainstream media. They come and they go, Craig Kelly's spreading misinformation all the time. And that's what they write. But, okay, tell me what I said. Tell me why it's wrong. And tell me the facts or the sources of the data that you have to justify your decision. And then give me the opportunity to rebut it. They don't. They just spread out this slur. It's the new way that the left debate. They just say, it's spreading misinformation, without actually saying what you said, trying to discredit you first, rather than actually debate the ideas. And as you said, that's right. Like today, I talked about this World Health Organization treaty. But there's many great scholars, there's some great scholars around the world talking about this. Just look what Matt Ridley wrote in the Daily Telegraph the other day. Really concerned about we would hand our powers over to these bureaucrats in the World Health Organization. And that's reported today on some bizarre theory or something I've had. Unfortunately, it just shows where we are. And is any wonder the mainstream media is falling in a screaming heap like it is, and they're losing ratings and viewers all the time.
Craig Kelly, I want to thank you for being on here. Thank you for being on the very first Prayer and Pushback. We've been through a journey. We'll be praying for you. Rest assured the Christian community will be praying for you, because I know, God raised you up to be a voice, and, I know that you're special. And Father, I ask you to bless Craig, bless his family, bless his children, protect them, lead him through this time, Father. I ask, Father, for every one of the freedom of the freedom candidates, that you bless them, give them wisdom to lead our nation. Craig Kelly, you're a good man.
Pat,
we love you.
If I just say one other thing, I know you're running very late tonight.
You're right, mate. You're right.
Election for the weekend. If people are out there and they're concerned about the direction that our country is going, please stand up, talk to our candidates in any of the 151 seats around the nation, and get out there, and if you can, help them on election day. Throw a yellow T-shirt on that says freedom, 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 and help hand out their how to vote cards for them. That's the best way to stand up and send a message to these major parties, to these major political parties. There we go. Here we go. Send a message to these major political parties that it hasn't been, what they have done hasn't been good enough. And I'm sure all our candidates need all the help that they can get. If you can give an hour's time or an hour and a half, please contact our candidates in each of your areas. Get out there and help them and stand up for those freedoms and liberties that are just so important to our nation.
Thanks, Craig Kelly. And Nathan was here waving and saying hi. But thanks, Craig. All the best for Saturday. People, get out there, support Craig, get out there, man those booths. And thanks for being on. James, I got to say, you're a great guy, mate. And I had a few things to close off with, but the floor's yours, mate. 5 minutes, just give it to us. You're a believer, you're a writer, you're a teacher, you're a pastor. Talk to us, speak into our lives, because you fit all those hats. And I'd love to hear what's on your heart for Saturday and for our country. And then I want to say a few words to everyone.
Pat, well, first, Pat, thanks for organising tonight. And I think it's obviously a big thing to pull together less than a week out from election to have the calibre of guests that you've had tonight. So credit to you and your team for pulling it together. And I hope it's been really valuable for people watching. A lot of people say, well, I'm not really interested in politics. And that's fine. But politics is interested in you. And I think we all know that now, because those of us who weren't interested in politics were then not allowed to travel more than a certain number of kilometres from our own front doors. We were told who we could not have over to our own homes. We were even told whether we could sing or not sing in places of worship. So I think the whole, well, I'm not interested in politics thing doesn't wash anymore. We all recognise politics is interested in us. And not only that, but I think we all understand we seem to be at a pretty crucial time, not just in our nation, but the world right now seems to be on a knife edge in so many ways and on so many issues. And so I think I'm probably preaching to the choir when I say this is a really important election for our nation. It's not business as usual. There's something very different happening in our nation. And I think as Christians, and I know not everyone is watching is a believer, but for those who are, I think in the next couple of days, it's really important that we pray for God's providence to happen in our nation, and then for people to make the most of their vote and to vote not simply according to tradition, but to vote according to those people they believe will best represent Christian values of righteousness and freedom. And so I think it's really important, and good on you, Pat, for tonight, for helping us to consider some of those issues and helping us to get to know a little better some of the key players, particularly in the freedom parties, who get very little air, as Craig Kelly was just saying, in mainstream media. But they're good people, they've got good ideas, and they are very worthy of our attention.
James, once again, guys, look, James is an incredible guy. He's a very busy guy, writes brilliantly. Follow him on Spectator magazine. Tell us where we can find you, James. I've got a few things to say. Tell us where we can find you one more time, brother.
Well, I've just got to say thank you to you, Pat, because I was checking during the interviews and the number of subscriptions to my Substack page has gone through the roof. So we should do this every single night.
Give it again. No, tell them where to go. We've got people going to be coming on all the time. Tell them I don't even know what Substack is. Don't get me to say it. I'll get it wrong. Tell them where it is. Where do we find you?
So every morning you get from me an email at 6 a.m. with one article about the topic of the day. And actually, tomorrow's article, it'll be in your email at 6 a.m., is on the difference between Christianity and wokeanity. And a lot of Christians are falling for woke and believing it's a form of Christian gospel. It's not. It's completely different. So that's tomorrow's topic. But if you'd like to receive those articles on faith, politics, culture, if you just Google James McPherson and Substack, S-U-B-S-T-A-C-K, Substack, you can sign up for a free email every morning, and it's just a different take on the news. Mainstream media, you don't get the truth. You don't get a Christian or faith perspective. If you'd like that, James McPherson, Substack.
My team just said they put the link in the chat. I'm telling you, let's get out there, support James. Thanks, James, for being on this. If you want to stick around for my final comments, I want to firstly thank everyone for being on tonight. Please don't log off right now. Stay with us. Two things. Get your free gift. Go and get your book. Come on, it's free. Educate your kids. Educate your family. Go and get the book. Go and log on also for our event. It doesn't come any better than free, and you get the audio of the book. We're making that as a gift from our organisation to you guys. Go there. And also Wednesday, for our financial freedom event. There will be a link that we will put in the chat. Please register for that. But I want to leave you with these thoughts, and I want you to hear me, because I know my audience is very mixed. You've got people of faith, people of no faith, agnostic, atheists, all of that. But the one thing we have in common is that we have eyes and we have ears. And we have heart and we have soul. And I want to give you a verse from the Bible, which is a very powerful verse, and I want you to hear it, and I'm not using it as a preach. It says, righteousness exalts a nation, but evil, sin, is a reproach. What it basically, if I had to put it in modern terms, is rightness makes a nation great. It makes a nation great. And sadly, we've had our leadership exalt wrong. One of the Psalms says this. It says that we must have no fellowship with those that devise evil by law. In other words, they do mandates by law, and they're wrong. And there is no right way to do a wrong thing, ever. Sadly, right now, many of us were rah for our Christian Prime Minister, who's now thrown Christian schools under the bus. Now he even promotes abortion, and sadly oversaw the bondage of thousands of Australians. But we can't be silent any longer. And maybe a good time in the wilderness for the Liberal Party will clean it out of its woketopia and its leftists, because they've abandoned conservative values. Now, I'm not anti-Scott Morrison. I reached out to him to ask him to come here, and I would honour him as a Prime Minister of this country. I want no negative comments about that, because that's what I'm told to do. But I wanted to ask the hard questions. I've asked other people of the Liberal Party to come on. Silence. Now, if you've got nothing to hide, you hide nothing, folks. So what is our response? Our response should be that we need to vote. And we need to vote with our conscience, and we need to vote with our values. If you didn't see certain people on here tonight, a part of, obviously, my friend Monica Smith, who we love dearly, and get behind her if you can. But people have asked me about certain people, and I go, well, I can't endorse them. But if I mentioned people like IMOC, Gap, obviously you saw Pauline here, and Craig, and Campbell, go and support them. Don't just vote with your fingers on a dashboard. It's time we speak. We have had enough of the bread and the circus. We've had enough of the handouts. We are capable to support ourselves financially as long as you allow us to work. We are not a lazy people. Sadly, many Australians have been addicted to the bread and the circus. We've been addicted to that. The bread being the handouts, the JobKeeper. How on earth organisations could have taken JobKeeper at the expense of the freedoms of people is a stain on our nation's soul. And what I'm asking is for Christian leaders to stand up. You guys actually created this platform for me because you were too silent. That's what happened. Every Sunday you open and stand with that holy book. One of my great lecturers said to me, Pat, if God calls you to be a preacher, don't stoop to be a king. God calls you to be a preacher. Don't stoop to be a king. You represent the oracle of God. And please don't tell me how tough it is. Everybody's got it tough because where you stand determines what you see. So it's time you speak. It's time that the voice of God, this sacred book that I'm not ashamed to hold up, this book here, this book, let me grab it. This book here, read what it says about God and government and godly government and ungodly government. Read it. And don't just give me Romans 13. Please don't push one scripture and deny 50 others. I'm asking you. Let's never let what happened in the last 2 years ever happen again. Why was the attack on this nation so great? Well, history says this nation was called the Great South Land of the Holy Spirit. This land was known for its voice of praise and worship, and boy, oh boy, has that been attacked. But I just want to say something to every negative voice and to every horde of hell. I've read the end of the book, and God wins. Not Soros, not Gates, not Zuckerberg, not Klaus. God wins. And regardless of what happens on the weekend, I want you to know, God has the last say. I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Can you please share this, like, subscribe? You know the drill. Hey, by the way, could you follow us on Instagram? We've been shadow banned on Instagram. I need you to go there. I'll get my team to put a link in here. Please go on Instagram, support us, get behind us there. And this Sunday, going to bring a powerful message post-election on our Sunday. You'll see me on Wednesday. I look forward to being with you on Wednesday in our financial freedom event. Make sure you register for that. Get your book. Thank you, everyone, for your support. Hey, we're not going anywhere but up. And just remember, God will always have the last say. God bless you, everybody, and thank you for joining us.